Welcome back to Ranked. I'm Charles.
I'm McCurdy.
Dude, where's Nans?
Where's Nance, dude?
Dude, where's Nans?
Where's Nance, dude?
Dude, where's your Nans, dude?
Where's your Nance?
He's probably having tech issues again.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He was like glitching out and stuff last time.
It's like the whole episode. It was weird. But we can't delay this any further. It's already taken us over 3 years to rank these f***ing movies. So, do you want to just go?
I guess, but what if we can't come to an agreement on Spectre? You know, that's happened before on this show. We will, you and I will, you know.
Yeah, I'm not really worried about that.
Why?
Well,
oh God, you're gonna chuck your Nance.
Spectre is easily the biggest piece of shit in the James Bondverse. You know how every episode I say we're here to love Bond and not hate Bond? Well, let's set that aside this time because this is the only Bond movie I actively f***ing despise. Sam Mendes returns to confirm that anything good about Skyfall was definitely a fluke. This movie is like a 3-course meal where the appetizer really gets us going, followed by a main course of big action and intrigue. But then we get to a dessert of piss, cum, curly scrotum hairs, and bloody scabbed over pus nuggets delivered through a fart nozzle straight down our face holes. At that point, it doesn't matter how good the rest of the meal was because you've already puked everything into the same yuck bucket. It's all ruined. That good stuff was only in service to something completely terrible. Specifically, a rushed and underwhelming script with idiotic plot convenience, as well as the really fucking terrible idea that Ernst Stavro Blofeld is James Bond's long-lost foster brother. A joke made in the Austin Powers movies strictly because it's such a bad idea that it could only ever be a joke in an Austin Powers movie. Turns out Blofeld was so pissed that his dad and James had a nice time skiing together one time that he murdered his own father with an avalanche that also covered up his own death before starting an international organized crime syndicate to get revenge on James, who just so happened to become a 00 agent entangled with that same organization. Blofeld then takes credit for everything that has happened to Bond since his first assignment, where he was randomly assigned to stop a bomb maker in Madagascar. I bet if you asked him, he'd say he was also the guy buying secrets from the bent station chief from the prologue of Casino Royale. Apparently, Spectre as we know it would not exist if Bond's parents had never died in a climbing accident, so James Bond would never have cuckooed Blofeld, who would then never have created Spectre, who would never have been behind all of Bond's adventures that shaped Bond into the 00 agent we know today. That idea is so f***ing stupid that I wish Blofeld would drill it out of my mind. Suddenly it's like Star Wars, where everyone is related to everyone, and I hate it because it introduces ridiculously romantic notions of fate and destiny into an otherwise simple franchise about a fictitious spy guy who stops bad guys. I'm the guy that said Skyfall was self-aggrandizing, but this is something else entirely. Apparently, the entire geopolitical world hinges upon the very existence of James Bond. Blofeld was only ever just a guy, a really smart, really power-hungry guy. He always saw Bond as a nuisance, not the epicenter of his very existence and his sole motivation in life. And yet with this, literally every word coming out of Blofeld's mouth is a pathetic attempt to justify his own presence in the film because the filmmakers obviously never planned for it. And the audience pandering this leads to is off the charts. Oh, you liked Casino Royale? Yeah, I did that. Oh, you liked Skyfall? Yeah, I did that too. You didn't like Quantum as much? Well, we'll ignore it as much as possible and pretend it didn't happen. The all-time biggest baddie of the Bondverse wastes all of his screen time whining about his supposed daddy issues and rewriting history. Is he really the invisible hand that has been guiding the events surrounding James Bond for 4 films? Or is this just some bullshit the writers conjured up as a desperate attempt to make Blofeld seem really important because audience dumb? If there were any breadcrumbs, any at all, that led up to this point, I'd be wildly impressed. Instead, I'm obviously fucking irate. The only thing this movie has going for it is the Spectre plot and relevant scenes, but that's nothing new. Spectre's thing has always been to stir up chaos in order to increase its power, occasionally posing as the good guys in order to do so. But as far as the movie itself goes, it feels like you're watching a movie set on random, just mixing in entire scenes and sequences lifted from other Bond movies, but not in a way where they congeal into anything coherent or enjoyable. There's hardly anything fun or entertaining about this movie. There's nothing deep or meaningful behind this movie. There's nothing revealed about Bond and zero depth to what is supposed to be his greatest nemesis, and therefore no purpose to this movie. And on top of that, like Quantum of Solace, it retroactively with the far superior films that came before it. Bottom line is that the very being of this film is so frail that its sole motivation is to continually attempt to justify its own existence. I swear on the souls of Ian Fleming and Sean Connery, as Martine Campbell is my witness, this movie shall be condemned to the darkest depths of the sacred list. So get out your nitpickers, motherfuckers, and let's tear this goddamn motherfucking ass titty fucking garbage piece of shit to pieces and ash pile, bitch.
That was the longest rant you've ever had.
There's a lot of spit. So much spit all over everything.
Are we actually done?
Yeah.
Are we, is that it? Is that
well, I got everything. I got all my emotions out. Now
you got your angst out. Now you got to bring back the logic.
Now I have room for knowledge. So
right.
fill the void with knowledge.
I will fill your
please.
head with all the knowledge. So let's start first off with the kind of the biggest part of this movie, right? Is Spectre. So McClory chapter closes. When we talked 3 years ago, when we were talking about Thunderball, this was the beginning of this long chapter with Eon Productions and Kevin McClory, who was the rights owner of the Thunderball story for film, not necessarily the book, which Ian Fleming actually held the rights onto the book, because I believe Spectre first appears in Thunderball.
The book, yeah.
Spectre doesn't show up in Dr. No or From Russia with Love in the books. And that's why, even though they were using it in the first two movies, they were using Spectre in the very first two Bond films.
I'm a member of Spectre.
Spectre?
Spectre. Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, Extortion. The four great cornerstones of power, headed by the greatest brains in the world.
They got around it, but at the same time, all of this stuff was happening all at once. But they were still able to use Blofeld in other films because he was in some of those other books after Thunderball, of course. And I think it was just because they were like, well, the lawsuit hasn't been settled, so we're like, let's just use it.
Quick recap is one tiny little mistake on Ian Fleming's part has rippled into this tsunami of shit that Eon has dealt with for 50 years?
I call it Fleming's one creative folly. That is what this is. Finally, after many years of back and forth of lawsuits due to Fleming's one creative folly with Kevin McClory, the McClory estate, because he had passed away, 2006, just to clarify, he passed away in 2006. So the McClory estate settled with Dan Jack, the company that is the rights owner of the Bond franchise, in 2013. That's a year after Skyfall had come out. And then this movie came out in 2015, which in turn allowed Eon Productions the rights to use Blofeld in the organization of Spectre once again in their films. If you recall, the last time Blofeld was seen in any of the Bond films was in For Your Eyes Only, and really only to be used as a middle finger cameo to McClory. The character is never named but hinted at. So there is some question as if they were like, oh, we think we're going to get the rights back because McClory's passed away and we're settling on it. So start writing that Spectre script. Or Eon's like, we got Spectre back. Great. Let's use them. Start writing the script. Like it could have been either one of those things. So returning to write the script of the next film was screenwriter of Skyfall, John Logan, with rewrites by Bond writers duo Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, as well as Jez Butterworth. That's his name is Jez. I think that's funny.
Okay.
Jez Butterworth, and then an interview with Ralph Fiennes.
Ray Fiennes.
Was it
Ray Fiennes?
Ray Fiennes.
With an interview with Ray Fiennes, he had said that there was a pitch by Mendez to have the new M be secretly a villain, which I think Fiennes shot down. I can see why he'd shoot it down. It actually makes sense why I think they would shoot it down, but I actually like this next idea even more, which I think would have helped the movie. There was also a draft that had Tanner being a Spectre mole. So either of those ideas would have been better for this movie, I think.
Would that have gelled with the previous movies?
Maybe, maybe not. We're not sure. I mean, it could have been like, hey, don't do any Spectre things. Like, you just gather information.
The movie doesn't just go, hey, Blofeld's here. Let's just let Blofeld do his Blofeld thing. Instead, the whole time Blofeld's trying to justify his own existence in the movie. That being said, if Tanner suddenly was bad, then it'd be like, oh, Tanner was the one who showed Bond where Patrice is. Tanner is the one who was there to lead Bond along these adventures at the behest of Blofeld. As I said, if there were any breadcrumbs that pointed, any Thanosian breadcrumbs that showcased that Blofeld has been there the whole time, having Tanner be the mechanism of that would have worked, because obviously there were no breadcrumbs of Blofeld in those movies, even if they used cheap flashbacks to show when Tanner's like, you should go after Patrice. Look, because remember, he's like, he's a ghost. Nobody knows where he is. But I found him.
He's a ghost, no known residence or country of origin.
So how do we find him?
Well, luckily, we still have one or two friends left in the CIA.
That would at least be something that would be like, wow, they did kind of plan this out. Or there were breadcrumbs, but they didn't. So I actually kind of think that would have been a good move.
Hey, real quick, are you hearing like a bump? Or is that just me?
Probably
I keep hearing a bump.
Probably your
No.
kids
It's like a computer, did it? Did you not hear that? I don't know what it is. I keep hearing it. It keeps popping up. Okay, so anyway, Sam Mendes does return to direct after Skyfall. This is the first director in a long time to do consecutive films, the last being John Glenn with License to Kill. There is some discrepancy I found with Mendes returning, because at one point, they did approach Nicholas Winding Refn to actually direct, which would have been kind of cool, because I really do like Drive. He is a little bit more of an auteur director, and I think it would have kind of been an interesting choice.
We talked about the dangers of an auteur, just how it's like, it might be too stylish.
He's stylish in a way that I think doesn't really gel. Like, I think Christopher Nolan being an auteur, he gels very well with James Bond.
Nolan, I have no doubt, would respect the material and wouldn't try to put his thumbprint on it. Maybe Refn would do the same.
He would. I think Nolan would, because he's even said, like, he's like, if I'm doing Bond, it's going to be my James Bond, and I don't think people want me to make my James Bond. But I think his thumbprint would be more in line to what people are used to watching James Bond movies, if that makes sense. Refn, on the other hand, I think with his stylistic choices are kind of a little farther out there, especially if you see some of his more recent films that were kind of on the more bizarre end.
Yeah.
But he may have been a good choice. I don't know. So, but really part of this was Mendes was like, well, I kind of want to take a break. I don't want to do another Bond movie right away, because he wanted to go back to doing the theater. But Mendes had said that he didn't want to come back, and he decided he would after seeing the future of Bond films were planned to film originally back to back. So they originally had a plan. They wanted to film this movie and the next movie back to back. The idea then got shot down to basically allowing for a Mendes schedule, because Mendes was like, well, I'll come back. And then they were like, okay, well, we'll make it 2014. And so you come back and then we'll get the movie out by 2015. So at one point, the idea for this film was going to be a two-parter, which may have explained some of the issues that I think you and I will discuss.
So
because I do feel like there's a lot of stuff in this movie that feels like this should have been two parts or had been the beginning of like a trilogy of Blofeld films. Another part of that could have been Craig, because there was a lot of times when they were talking about making this film, Craig had said some things about, playing James Bond that he was done, or that he wanted to stab his eyes out, or he would do anything else than play James Bond at this point. And I really think that was mainly because he had even said, it's like, I was tired. I hadn't seen my family in over a year or so. I rather want to do something else. I don't want to go directly playing back to James Bond.
He clearly has shown that, unlike Sean Connery, yes, Sean Connery did want to get away from the character, but Sean Connery is James Bond in a way.
Like that whole motif was him.
When he's smacking Tiffany Case.
You sound like a cop to me.
He's channeling himself. Like he's playing himself in that moment.
You did an interview in which you said, it's not the worst thing to slap a woman now and then. As I remember, you said you don't do it with a clenched fist. It's better to do it with an open hand. Yeah, remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I didn't love that.
I haven't changed my opinion.
Whereas Daniel Craig did everything he could to be like, I'm not Bond. The different commercials and things he's been in have been, I'm not just James Bond. I'm this really talented guy, which he is. But it's like he did everything he could. Like, the guy would put on a dress if it means he could show that he's not James Bond, which I have mixed feelings about. But I get it. I get that it's like you're an artist, and yet everybody associates you with this character that you aren't. Remember, as far back as You Only Live Twice? Sean Connery being interviewed on being James Bond, and he was just wearing a wife beater or something. The guy said, is this how James Bond dresses? And he's like, I'm not James Bond. I'm Sean Connery. Like, come on, you know. But can you imagine that level of like, that's any famous person has to deal with that. That's why fame is a blessing and a curse, because on the one hand, it's like, hey, I've finally made it. I'm finally rich and famous because I found a character that I was born to play. But then at the same time, just showing how the black box is that powerful that people watch it enough that their reality is overtaken by a manufactured reality to the point where it's like, you are that person. You are James Bond, and you can't ever be any other character because you are James Bond. Must be bizarre, you know. For those of us on the outside, we go, that sounds fun. For those on the inside, they're like, it's ruined my life. You think it's a blessing? It's a curse. That perfect sweet spot of fame would be Michael G. Wilson. Can you imagine being Mikey G. Wiz and nobody knows who you are? We know who he is. If we saw, I have a T-shirt with his face on it. Like, if I saw him, I'd know it was him. But your average person has no idea who he is.
I have no idea who that is. Who's Mikey G. Wiz?
Exactly.
You'll know.
Once again, did you catch the Mikey G. Wiz cameo in this movie?
I didn't.
He is in the scene where Mallory goes to talk to C, right before he calls him a cocky little bastard. Mikey G. Wiz is talking to C, and then Mikey G. Wiz fucks off, and then they have their moment.
You're a cocky little bastard, aren't you?
Once again, Mikey G. Wiz is just hanging out in hallways, just like he was in Skyfall.
So this film doesn't have Roger Deakins, which was a huge point about Skyfall that people always like to bring up. But maybe they got the next best thing in this film, and that was Hoyt van Hoytma. I love saying that name. Hoyt van Hoytma.
Did you look up how to say that?
Hoyt.
You
van
had to
Hoytma. I was watching a video of like famous cinematographers and the cameras they use, and he was one of them. But he is starting, I think he is slowly starting to get a name for himself, but he was much like Deakins, but mainly because he associates himself with Nolan. He's like been Christopher Nolan's main DP for the last 5 movies he's done.
He took over for
Wally Pfister.
For Wally Pfister.
Pfister, yeah.
Yeah. Remember, I think on a live stream, I told the story of how I was at a talk with Wally Pfister, and he was walking out, and I was sitting at the very back, and he walked by me, and I just go, thanks, Wally. And he turned, and he was like, he basically gave me like the ending of Breakfast Club. And I just was like we had a moment. We had a moment.
You nerd.
Because at the time, what happened was he was working on his directorial debut, which crashed and burned, and he hasn't worked
I remember that.
ever since, apparently.
Yeah.
So, right. I mean, he took a chance on stepping up into
good
that
for him.
role.
I hope he comes back.
Do you think he's coming back?
I don't know.
I hope he comes back, too.
I hope he does something and someone brings him back.
Yes, really cool, down-to-earth guy. I mean, the guy shot The Dark Knight.
Right.
So anyway, he gets replaced by this other guy who more or less, it's like Nolan was looking for the same guy. He has a very
similar style.
Exactly.
Hoyt van Hoytma, if you look at all of his films, they are the very crisp. Like, this is why I keep saying, like, if Nolan were to do a Bond film, it wouldn't be that much of a stretch from what they've been doing with all the Craig films, because I think his style kind of lends very heavily to it. Another big thing to mention with this movie is the song Writing on the Wall.
Writings on the Wall?
Written by Jimmy Napes and Sam Smith, sung by Sam Smith. It is, personally for me, not my favorite Bond song. I think Skyfall is still the best modern Bond song there's been in a long, long time. I think Writing on the Wall is weird. Actually won Best Original Song that year at the Oscars. The same award that was previously won by the Adele song, the last Bond movie that had come out. But personally, for me, it's not my favorite.
It won an Oscar?
I like
Writings on the Wall won an Oscar?
Yeah. I was shocked. I was like, really? That one? Not my favorite. I would have loved if they were just like, if we're going to go back to tradition, let's bring back like Adele again, kind of like they brought back Shirley Bassey for Goldfinger and then Diamonds Are Forever. It's like, let's bring her back. Let's do another one. If we had Scott here, he would probably tell us like, oh, you don't get it. Sam Smith's so genius. And I'm like,
it would be nice to have Scott here. It's been since the GoldenEye episode, since anybody's even heard from Scott. So it'd be nice if he came back.
Do you think he's coming back?
I don't know.
It would be nice if he came back, but I don't know what he's been up to. I've tried to call him a couple times, and he's not answering my calls.
It's
I don't
like
know
he
if I did something
fell
to him.
off the face of the earth. Nobody has heard from Scott since GoldenEye, but if he was here, he might agree with me where remember what I said about Quantum of Solace, that after you have a big hit like Casino, everybody is that much more critical of the follow-up. And I think that's
okay. So you think Sam Smith's song's not as good? Like isn't as bad? You like it?
I like Writings on the Wall. I think people are more critical of it specifically because it's the follow-up to Skyfall. It's not Skyfall. It's never going to be as good as Skyfall. But on its own, I'm like, this is and I think Sam Smith is a psycho. I mean, he has turned into a weirdo psychopath. But
we all know
separating
how you
art
feel
from
about
artist, which I'm very good at doing, I remember
You like this one.
I remember first seeing this movie and being like, oh, that song was different and it's not as big. It's certainly
it's weird.
It's more muted.
It's a weird song because it goes up and then all of a sudden it's like drops down a little bit in what he's saying, and you feel like there's going to be this big buildup like this movie, and then it just kind of peters out. It's like,
we talked about how Skyfall was such a good song because it was very much an old school Goldfinger-esque song where it's big horns and it's just like a classic Bond song. Whereas this, it'll suddenly just cut out the orchestration and suddenly just be Sam Smith. I was honestly shocked when, after seeing the movie for the first time, suddenly all these people were coming through and saying, I hate it. They were straight up saying they hate the song. And I was like, well, why? It's not terrible. Why do you hate it? And I can't help but think it's because they are subconsciously comparing it to Skyfall in the same way that people compare Quantum to Casino.
Maybe. It grows on you a little bit. But I think really, again, it's a very strange song where it like goes up and then you think it's going to go here and then it kind of drops back down. You're like, I was expecting up and you gave me down, and I don't like that.
I have to risk it all, 'cause the writing's on the wall.
Adele was big, and so they bring her in. Sam Smith was really big, and then eventually Miss Eyelash, they bring her in. Like, it's always whoever just won an Oscar, whoever just won a Grammy.
We've criticized that in the past, and we realized that over time. We're like, oh, it's always been that way. That's never changed. They've always been doing that since at least the 70s for sure. So the DB5 makes a return, a topic we will discuss because I have issues with it. You have issues with it. But Aston Martin also introduced the DB10, which was specifically created for this movie. So
was there a 6, 7, 8, 9?
I don't know if that's how they number it. It might have just been like 10 sounds cool. So
that's twice as many 5s.
Right. Well, no, because there was the DBS, which was one of them.
Well, S looks like 5. That's probably where that came from.
The one that Timothy Dalton drove, that was not a DB. I think that was like the DB something, but it wasn't. I'd have to go back and look. Hold on. Give me 2 seconds. Let me find out which one that was.
We could just wait for Nans to show up and he can clarify.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah. Crickets.
The Aston Martin V8 was the other one. But it was called the V8. So I imagine it's because it's a V8 engine. Okay. Was what I was referring to. And then there was the Vanish.
Aston Martin call it the Vanquish. We call it
The Vanish.
Or the Vanquish. It was the Aston Martin Vanquish. That was the one that was in Die Another Day.
Yeah.
Which was very similar to the one that was in Casino. But that's cool. I think it was neat that they were like, yeah, there's a new Bond movie. Great. We're going to make this specific car for the Bond movie. Let's get on to the actors, shall we? Christoph Waltz plays Franz Obenhauser, a.k.a. Ernest Stravos. Ernest. It's Ernest. It is Ernest. It's Ernest.
You're very consistent in your
I just
George
want it to be
Bushisms.
Ernest so this movie makes sense. It's Ernest so the movie makes sense. Okay, Chucky?
Okay. All right.
Ernst Stravos Blofeld. Waltz has been acting in film and television primarily in Germany all the way back to the 70s. He became known worldwide to American audiences with his role as Colonel Hans the Jew Hunter Landa in Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds.
Yeah, that was his first Oscar win.
Around the time he was cast for Spectre, he had just won Best Supporting Actor for Tarantino's next film, Django Unchained. It's no surprise that Barbara and Mikey G. Wiz wanted him to be the big bad for this film.
It's a great idea. When it was first announced that this genius of an actor was going to play the supposedly greatest Bond nemesis ever, it was like that is perfect casting. Chasing this trend, this transcends chasing trends. This is a great call. This is fate. And then they hand him the stupidest script ever, where it's like, what's the complexity of my character? Everything about my character is just justifying why I'm here.
Right.
What? No, there's a whole backstory. Well, do we explore that at all? No, you just say cuckoo a lot.
Cuckoo.
Cuckoo, cuckoo.
He's like not bad in the role.
He's
just
doing his
acting.
best.
I'm talking about his ability, his acting ability. He's not bad. That's something I would say across the board with this movie. I don't think any actor or actress in any of the roles are bad.
Yeah.
I just think it really comes down to the script, honestly.
Yeah.
Léa Seydoux plays Madeleine Swann, another Inglourious Basterds alum, which is kind of fun. Seydoux is a French actress best known for films such as Midnight in Paris, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, Blue is the Warmest Color. I only smiled there because I've seen people go to that movie. It's like, oh, check this movie. It's two lesbians having sex. And I'm like, okay, cool. I've never seen it. I just know people mention that all the time. I think it's funny.
Shouldn't it be called Pink is the Hottest Color then?
Why are you a anyway, I don't think she's bad in the movie.
I think she's miscast, but she's a good actress.
I agree.
She has the most severe case of resting bitch face that has ever been diagnosed. That's not the worst thing, but there's a specific part of the movie where she's been a bitch the whole time, and then all of a sudden, arbitrarily, it flips on its head. But we'll get to that.
Great actress. I agree. Miscast.
Just like Waltz. Just like Christoph Waltz. Great actors. But the script isn't helping anybody in this film.
No. Andrew Scott plays Max Denby. Denbig? I think that's how it says it, right? Denby.
Yeah.
Plays Max Denby, a.k.a. C. I know you are going to say he played Private John Cowboy Hall in Band of Brothers.
Anybody in the Fellowship or the Band of Brothers gets an automatic toast. Cheers.
Okay. However, the thing that really made him stand out was playing James Moriarty, Sherlock's nemesis in the Benedict Cumberbatch BBC show Sherlock, which I think he's actually really good in.
Yes.
I think he's a genuinely pretty decent villain in this movie. Again, I think he's doing a good job.
That's the third actor in a row that you've said, really good actor, but a piece of shit script. There's a pattern here, Mr. McCurdy.
Let's get to this really quick because I know you want to go ask me questions about this because this is a topic of concern amongst people who watch this movie.
Yes.
Because it makes no goddamn sense to us goddamn Americans.
Uh-huh.
Okay? So, C, why is he called C? Everyone's like, why does Bond out of nowhere say, I think I'll call you C?
I know what it stands for.
So why does he do that?
Every American is like this. They're like, does that mean Let me lay out the scene. Bond is meeting C for the first time, and it's this guy just got promoted. He's now your boss. And Bond's like, that's great. We should call you C now.
Suppose we should call you C now.
But up until then, there is no C word for the audience to attach to, where it's like, oh, is he the captain of something? No. Is he the chief of something? No. They just say he's
the head of the Joint Security Service.
And then out of nowhere, Bond's like, oh, we should call you C. And the audience goes, wait, what? Did I miss something? I was in the bathroom. What happened? And he's like, no, you don't need to call me C. And Bond's like, no, bitch. I'm going to call you C.
Suppose we should call you C now.
No, Max, please.
No, I think I'll call you C.
Because you're a c***. But he doesn't say that last part, but all of our brains go, what is C, what is C, what is C? He must mean c***. What else could that mean? Why did Bond turn it into an insult out of nowhere? It has to mean something bad. What's a bad C word? See you next Tuesday. Done. But then you're like, you rewind the tape. You're like, but what was C? Where did C originate? Bond just makes it up on the spot, and I don't get it, and I've never gotten it. And even if I Google it, Google can't tell me. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what C means other than c***.
They do. It's out there.
Please tell me.
I will clarify what C means for you.
By the way, somebody in the Discord, I'm sorry, I've had so many boozes. I can't remember who in the Discord said, because I asked the Discord, I was like, guys, why is he named C? And somebody was like, well, obviously because he heads up the bullshit C plot. That's funny. That's funny.
Okay, so C is the sign letter. This is your code name, a signed letter given to the chief of the Security Intelligence Service, which is AKA, that is MI6. Not necessarily for chief, but because Captain Sir Mansfield Smith Cummings, the first chief of Secret Intelligence Service, would sign his name with a green C on all of his documents. So it became a tradition.
What if that guy's name was Cuntings?
And you can look this up. If you look up who's the chief officer of Secret Intelligence Service, on the bio in Wikipedia, it'll say C under the current person. So it is a thing in Britain that that person is dignified under C. Now, let me go further. With this, right? Fleming, let's go back to our boy Ian Fleming. Fleming used M instead of C for his code naming of the characters, possibly because there's actually a couple of reasons maybe he did this, but some people believe it's because he knew Maxwell Knight. Now, Maxwell Knight wasn't the head of MI6, but he was the head of MI5, and they were good friends. They knew each other. And so, like Cummings, which is Mansfield's last name, he did the same thing, but had the document signed with an M in recognition of that. And I believe if you go into the books, I think his name's Miles, but I think his last name's M or something like that, as far as the M in the books, right?
Okay.
Now, part of it is, as far as the fandom goes, I think we even, to the beginning of this podcast, we were under the assumption that M is the head of MI6.
Since I've been head of MI7, there's been a 40% drop in 00 operative casualties.
This movie kind of makes the point that it's like, you're not the head of MI6, you're the head of the 00 division. I don't know if the movies prior to this really made that distinction, but then we also have to remember, like, the earlier films didn't refer to it as MI6, just referred to it as Universal Exports as the code name for the intelligence service in James Bond.
James Bond, Universal Exports.
At least this whole bit is, I think, a little more clever than it is on its face, because, of course, if you don't understand what C is, you're like, what? But the clever part of it is, and this is what I think the writers were intending, was that Bond is a man of tradition. He is old ways best from Skyfall, right? So he's going to go with, this is the protocol. We always call the head of the intelligence service, we call him by the code name. You're C. So I'm going to call you C. And the other guy's like, no, I don't believe in this tradition bullshit. I am trying to take spycraft out of MI6. Like, that is my whole mission, essentially, on face value before we realize more about him. But he's just like, yeah, I don't believe in that stuff. That's silly. I'm not going to do that. And James Bond immediately is like, oh, you're a I think I'll call you C. So
yeah,
it is like, he believes in tradition. The other guy doesn't believe in tradition. And eventually he's kind of calling him a anyway. I think that part's brilliant. However, to your point, the movie never clarifies. And also, if you rewatch the scene, he doesn't say chief, which is what some people would think the C means, but that's not really what it is. But at least chief would lead you to being like, oh, chief, C, I get that. But instead he says head. And if he had said chief, I think it would have made a clarification that he was indeed a
And now we know what C stands for.
For us Americans who don't know the inner workings of MI5, MI6, whatever it is, especially because these have always been American-made films. They're about a guy in Britain. They're about Britain itself, but they've always been American-made. Going back to the beginning,
but it's always a British-American production.
But Harry Saltzman,
that's my point to it.
Harry Saltzman
is an American, yes,
and Cubby Broccoli were two Americans who took control of this British property. And so my point is that they've always been. Why is it that anybody gets famous? You know, the Beatles were famous in Britain, and and then you go to the United States, and that's where you enter the world stage. You have to prove yourself here because we're the, until we're taken over by Spectre in Russia and China. You have to make it in the United States to be a big thing. That's just me stating a fact.
As far as showbiz, as far as entertainment and showbiz, I mean, even like 2 minutes ago, I just said nobody knew who Christoph Waltz was until he did Quentin Tarantino's film.
Exactly.
Nobody knew who he was. All of a sudden, Americans knew. Everybody knew who he was.
That being the case, you have to spell out what C means. And if it was, like you said, if they just said chief, that would be enough to go, oh, C. And then when Bond... So what you just laid out is brilliant. I didn't know that. Honestly, it's no different than the first emperor of Rome is Caesar. And then from then on, the emperor is known as Caesar. That just happened to be the name of the first guy who held the position, but then everybody after that, Caesar became synonymous with emperor because that was the first guy. Same concept. C becomes the head of this thing. But without any context, you're like, you don't get what you just said. And the brilliant part is that it's Bond being a traditionalist and Max Denby coming in and being a progressive and shaking things up. That is lost to me, and I would respect that scene if it was a little more clear as to why Bond immediately says C, regardless of chief or whatever. Then the context, the subtext of the scene would have come to light, and I would like that scene more, but it's lost, and that is definitively sloppy, unfortunately.
I will ask this of the audience. If you're from the UK or from Britain, does that scene make sense to you when you watched it the first time?
Neil Jackson.
I want to know that because
Neil,
we were
need
talking
you to
about
in.
it. We need somebody.
What's your opinion?
We need someone.
That's
we need a
common
Brit to weigh
knowledge.
in.
Everybody knows about C. He's like George
that's what I need to know.
Washington.
Right. That's what I need to know because it is that is confusing. I still think that is clever. I think that whole thing is actually pretty clever.
The intention is brilliant, but the execution is piss poor, which is what this whole movie is.
Our henchman for this movie, because we haven't had like a good, memorable henchman in even the Craig era, unfortunately. But next we have Dave Bautista, plays Mr. Hinx. Bautista came from the world of wrestling.
Mr. Hinx?
Mr. Hinx.
And they never say that, right?
They never say it. They never say his name. Bautista came from the world of wrestling and he was in 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy, a year prior to this movie coming out. So Mendez thought Bautista would decline the role because he thought the character has virtually no lines except for one. But it was quite the opposite. Bautista was a fan of James Bond, and he's like, yeah, totally, I want to be in it. I love the idea of playing like an odd job or a Jaws, somebody who doesn't have any lines, and having the challenge of like acting with no lines. Again, an actor who I think does a good job in this movie, but the script doesn't do him any favors.
There's a theme here.
There's a trend. And that character is mainly inspired by Oddjob, it's pretty obvious
Oddjob
as you're
Jaws.
watching these movies.
For sure,
yeah,
Oddjob and
totally,
I mean,
100%.
He's got steel thumbnails and not steel teeth.
I think that's a cool inclusion. Cool, we're bringing back cool henchmen. I like that. That's kind of cool. Monica Bellucci. I'm going very strong Italian. Bellucci? Monica Bellucci.
All I have to say is go watch Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula if you want to see a good Monica Bellucci movie.
She's great. She plays
She's
Lucius.
really talented.
Pretty talented girl.
She's an Italian actress, of course. I think most people would remember her more than from Dracula, but from the Matrix.
The Matrix, yeah. In that movie, she really shows off her talent.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. She plays Lucia Sicaria, Marco Sicaria's widow. The main thing everyone likes to bring up when they talk about her is that she's the oldest Bond girl. She was 50 when they cast her. They made a huge deal about it. I'm like, good for her. She looks gorgeous in this movie. Who gives a shit? Like, I'm like, great, fantastic, don't care. She had actually originally auditioned, and I may have said this back in the Tomorrow Never Dies episode, but she auditioned for Paris Carver, and she didn't get the role. Terry Hatcher did, but that was all the way back in 97. So she was kind of still on the radar as Bond girls go. But yeah, she was originally going to be in that, but they passed on her. Of course, we got Ben Henshaw, Naomi Harris.
How do you see Wishaw and say Henshaw? You are consistently
I know somebody whose name was Henshaw. That's fine. It's probably because I know someone whose name is Henshaw, and I just like, my brain goes there. So Wishaw. It just sounds weird. I don't know. Ben Wishaw, Naomi Harris.
Dude, it's been like 6 to 8 months since we recorded last, and you still mispronounce the exact same words. It's so funny.
Charlie.
Isn't that what M stands for? Moron.
And then Rory Kinnear. They all return as Bond's MI6 allies, Q, Moneypenny, New M, and Bill Tanner. Jesper Christensen returns as Mr. White. Had actually been killed in a scene that was cut from Quantum of Solace, but that's actually kind of a neat detail because he is the one thing in this movie, as far as the script and the plot goes, that I think works as far as tying everything together with Spectre. Another fun tidbit with this film is the addition of Oberhauser, which is a reference to Octopussy. Hans Oberhauser. In this film, he's Blofeld's dad, but in the book, he's just another guy. He's actually Bond's ski instructor and for young Bond, and becomes a like a second father figure.
Basically, all it is that remember in Octopussy, the backstory about her dad.
You remember Major Dexter Smythe? You were sent out to arrest him, weren't you?
Yes, Smythe, after a brilliant military career, was seconded to our Secret Service. His mission was to recover a cache of Chinese gold seized in North Korea. Both he and his native guide disappeared. The gold was never found.
And 20 years later, you were sent after him.
Well, the guide's body turned up with a bullet still in his skull from Smythe's service revolver. I traced Smythe to Sri Lanka, faced him with the facts, and gave him 24 hours to clear up his affairs before I took him back.
He committed suicide rather than face the disgrace of a court-martial.
What's the connection?
He was my father.
Octopussy is a short story that is literally just Bond showing up to the guy's house, sitting down with him and having this talk where Bond puts in not so uncertain terms, hey, I'm going to leave here, and in 24 hours, I'm going to show up with the authorities, which basically means you can come with us or you can kill yourself. And so when they adapted the film Octopussy, they just gave that backstory to a character they made up, Octopussy. Octopussy in the book is literally an octopus, but in the film that became Beautiful Maud Adams.
My father became a leading authority on octopi. His pet name for me was Octopussy.
She then has this backstory where she's like,
I'd hoped fate would bring us together one day.
To avenge him?
No, to thank you for giving him an honorable alternative.
No, I don't want vengeance for you forcing my dad to kill himself. I want to thank you by f***ing your brains out for giving my dad an honorable option. So therefore, my family was able to keep all this gold that he stole. But in the book, Bond shows up to this guy's house and is like, okay, look, we know how you got all this money. You got all this money that allows you to go diving with octopi all day because at the end of World War II, there was all this Nazi gold. There was this Austrian guy who knew where it was, and you guys climbed up a bunch of mountains, and he helped you find the gold, and then you killed him. Well, that guy was Hans Oberhauser, who Bond actually had a personal connection to because Hans taught him how to ski. And I think Bond puts it as like a very impressionable time in my life, which is, you know, interpreted as after his parents died.
You probably know that James here lost his parents when he was young. But did you know that it was my father who helped him through this difficult time? Over the course of 2 winters, he taught him to ski and climb and hunt.
But then in this movie, Bond's parents die, and Hans was his foster father.
Right.
And then the son of that foster father, Franz Oberhauser.
I'm Hans. And I'm Franz.
The original name of the man who would then become Blofeld after he takes his mother's maiden name, just like what movie?
I don't remember. What was it?
The World Is Not Enough.
Your father
My father was nothing. His kingdom he stole from my mother.
Oh, yeah.
And she's like, my mother's bloodline.
My mother's bloodline.
Another one is the Hildebrand sign. One title that they have never used as its own movie was the Hildebrand Rarity, which again is a short story.
The Hildebrand Rarity largely influenced License to Kill. In the Hildebrand Rarity is Crest. Remember, Crest ends up being the guy in License to Kill
You're right.
who gets his head exploded.
I got the guy who set me up.
Well done, Franz. I'm Hans. I'm done, Franz.
But again, it is a reference. When you watch him go to the safe house, there's a sign that says Hildebrand. That's a reference to the short story Hildebrand Rarity.
It says Hildebrand something and rarities. Clear reference to the Hildebrand Rarity.
Yes, which is nice. I like that they add those little, like, if you know, you know, kind of things in the movies.
Never even heard of Hildebrand.
That is the general idea with safe houses.
I find this fascinating. The Day of the Dead parade was never actually a thing in Mexico. There's not really a parade that was the equivalent of that, but because people saw the film, they were like, we should do this. We should have this.
Oh.
So Mexico ended up putting some money up, and they actually brought a bunch of people to do this big parade in Mexico Square. So I think that's kind of cool. All that being said, Nans, what did you think of this movie? Oh, wait, I forgot. He's not here. Well, maybe he'll show up later. It's going to be fine.
Yeah. Do you want to just sit here for a while until he might show up? How about for old time's sake? 2, 3, 4. Stand by your
Nans. I feel like you say it 3 times, he might show up again. So let's
stand by your Nans. Stand by your Nans. Stand by your Nans.
Okay, it didn't work. Okay, that's weird.
He'll show up.
Yeah, he'll
show up. Okay, I'm gonna read this list now.
Okay.
GoldenEye, Casino Royale, Goldfinger, From Russia with Love, Skyfall, License to Kill, The Spy Who Loved Me, The Man with the Golden Gun, Dr. No, The World Is Not Enough, A View to a Kill for Your Eyes Only, On Her Majesty, Secret Service, Quantum of Solace, Thunderball, Tomorrow Never Dies, Octopussy, The Living Daylights, Live and Let Die, Moonraker, Diamonds Are Forever, Die Another Day, You Only Live Twice. Still at the bottom. Not for long, bitches. That's where I'm at. I am obviously a strong proponent, based off my opening rant, of Spectre just being the most insufferable. Like I said, it's the only Bond movie I actively hate. Right. Almost every episode, it's like, you just hate this. You just hate that. No. I'm being critical of it.
I enjoy, like, as much as you and I have had arguments over The Man with the Golden Gun, which I still to this day don't think it deserves where it's at. Till this day.
Because you're a f***ing blasphemer. You're a heretic when it comes to the sacred list.
Right. Sure. Yes. Anyway, I will say, though, I still enjoy watching that movie. I don't hate watching it because it's a James Bond movie. If it's on, I'll watch it. It's fun. I'll watch
That's
it.
such a big boy thing for you to say.
Shut the f*** up.
Because even...
You're such a... Did I ever tell you? You know what? You're such a... Okay?
Call me C. Call me C. And
you are a C.
C works for me because that happens to be the first letter of my name. So when you call me C, you're like...
What does the C in Chucky Rants stand for? Well, you know.
So
that's what that means.
I noticed something about the top 10 after we threw Skyfall in there, which is that if you take the top 10 and you pair them off, right? 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. We've had all these arguments about each of these where they pair off nicely, where the more Bond, quote, the more Bond movie ends up being the superior film. So GoldenEye versus Casino Royale. GoldenEye wins. The more Bond movie. Goldfinger versus From Russia with Love. Goldfinger is the more Bond movie. Not just the spy elements, but it's the super spy elements. The Bond super spy elements that made Goldfinger above From Russia with Love. License to Kill versus Skyfall. We gave it to Skyfall. It's just more of a Bond-esque movie in a classy sense. The Spy Who Loved Me versus Man with the Golden Gun. We gave it to The Spy Who Loved Me. Dr. No versus The World Is Not Enough. We gave it to Dr. No. Just a coincidence, but just a pattern that I noticed.
Real talk. Going into this conversation, going into the octagon that I knew this conversation was going to go, initially, I am in agreement with the general prospect of this movie being a very low tier list movie for many reasons. But my personal thoughts on the movie as rewatching it for the first time in a long time, because it's not one of my favorites. I don't go back and be like, oh, I really want to watch Spectre and something I had said about Casino and Quantum, again, this movie kind of does do a lot of fuckery where you kind of, it's like you think the movie's going to do this thing that I think fans would enjoy, that you're like, oh yeah, that's cool. They're tying everything together. They're keeping the Craig universe kind of its own thing. I kind of like that aspect of this movie. I think it's a good movie for the first half. It's a good movie the first half. Not a great movie.
The first 2 courses of a meal.
First half of the movie, the first half of this movie, and it's if you go back and watch, like the first half of the movie up until about around the time, I'm not going to say it's just a specific like timestamp moment, but around the time that they go to the clinic, that's when the movie starts to nosedive.
Yep.
And there's one scene in particular for me that nosedives the whole movie, but we can talk about that in a bit. But my initial like high low for the ranking though, or initially my thinking was The Living Daylights. I think it's somewhere at the Living Daylights is at the highest The Living Daylights, and only because The Living Daylights for me is a movie that
above Living Daylights,
maybe below. Say below okay. Living Daylights, and only because I think The Living Daylights is a movie that at its worst, or the things that I think we complained about the most, is that it just doesn't make you care enough for the outcome of the film. It's like the stakes are not high enough for you to give a shit. So why should I give a shit? And then you just kind of left there like, what did I watch? Like, why did I care? Like, that Timothy Dalton guy was great, but like, I don't know about the movie.
We've said repeatedly that The Living Daylights suffers from both a lack of logic and emotion. It's got that convoluted Mikey G. Wiz script coupled with why should I care? So the only reason you should care is Timmy D.
Yeah, they don't give you a reason to care. Okay, now going down the list, because I know you're very adamant about it being at the very bottom of the list.
Yes, I am.
I think Live and Let Die, even for its goofiness, I still think it's a better movie. I enjoy Live and Let. I think the music, again, like that just elevates the movie instantly as the music for that movie. But I do like the uniqueness of that movie. I like all the henchmen of that movie. I like the Bond girl a lot more in that movie. There's a lot more I think I like about Live and Let Die. So that's where I'll go. Yeah, I think Spectre is below Live and Let Die. Then we get to Moonraker, and that's where I could see like Moonraker, Diamonds, Die Another Day, You Only Live Twice. That's like more in the realm where I think it should live, somewhere in that realm. Okay. I guess the things that are keeping me from saying this movie's absolute shit and it should go to the bottom, and it's bullshit reasons that you're going to go, F you, McCurdy. I think, at least at the very end of the day, I think the execution of this...
You know what M stands for, McCurdy? Moronic.
It should just be moron, but whatever.
Yeah, but I want to bring back into it because it's such a great word.
I like saying that word. It's fun. I think there is a part of me that's like, yeah, the execution of this movie does excel. And I know you were saying the movie's not enjoyable, and I did find myself enjoying a good amount of this movie after rewatch, and I'm like, actually, I kind of do enjoy it a little bit, but I think we may come to an agreement, because I think if we talk about it more, you could persuade me to just say I think this is the bottom, because that's
and why is that?
Okay, so I was doing my own soul searching on this movie. I was walking through the fields of grass and contemplating and really inheriting my inner Chucky Rants and just questioning everything about life. And I came to some conclusions about this movie that kind of pissed me off. Kind of made me mad.
Good.
That turned me into a Chucky Rants.
Excellent. Just to clarify your position real quick, though, you're saying below Live and Let Die.
Like, I could see it being above Die Another Day.
My proposition, yes, the very f***ing bottom. You Only Live Twice may be underwhelming, despite having ninjas and helicopter battles, all this ridiculously awesome stuff.
Right.
But still underwhelming at the end of the day, and something that nobody really cared about. But it's at least a complete Bond adventure. Old school Bond adventure, but still a complete Bond adventure. Sure. I find myself laughing at the pitifully adorable You Only Live Twice, but frothing at the mouth over the inexcusably bad Spectre. a movie made 40, 50 years later. This movie feels like they got the rights to Thunderball and pumped out a first draft in a weekend and went straight into production. The movie spends most of its time trying to justify its own existence rather than telling a worthwhile story with a comprehensive plot. To that end, it doesn't matter how long it's good before it goes to complete shit. Every Bond movie has some good moments. That's why we always say, we don't hate Bond, we love Bond.
Yeah.
Die Another Day is stupid and ridiculous, but fun, and has a really entertaining bad guy. I mean, the whole thing about that was that the movie begins one way and ends another, so it's kind of inconsistent.
It does, and I agree. I would agree with you on that, because I do think about this movie, and even when I first saw the movie, I think this movie kind of has just a dark and dreary feel, and there's not a lot of levity. There's just that's the best word I would say, is not just humor or goofiness. It's just there is small moments of levity.
It does start to show
it goes
that
a
it's
little
getting goofy.
too dark.
No, it's starting to get goofy.
It's getting goofy.
This is the first Craig movie that is starting to get goofy. So anyway, Diamonds Are Forever is, and I'm working my way up the list, Diamonds Are Forever is a hilarious comedy that knows exactly what it is and plays to that. Moonraker is Moonraker. Need I say more? So on and so forth. The flip side of that is Skyfall and Golden Gun. Full of faults. Both movies full of faults. But the story and its themes and bad guy are awesome enough to elevate them above the simple perfection of Dr. No or whatever else, right? The stuff that makes Skyfall great overwhelms the stuff that makes it bad. So Spectre has little to care about, and a crap bad guy, and a forced romance, and a loose plot with vague stakes, and is the only movie worthy of actual hatred because the core of its supposed story is just too dumb, the whole they're brothers thing, and not set up whatsoever. I don't like watching this movie. It's like watching the end of Game of Thrones, or watching Game of Thrones in general. If the ending is the worst part, it ruins everything that came before it, so there's no point in ever watching it again. It's like if Splash Mountain ended not with a splash through water, but straight into the Disneyland sewer system. It doesn't matter if you were having a good time before being covered in shit, and you'd certainly never want to ride it again. That's the analogy. It's like, oh my God, we're having fun. And then it's so bad in the end that it doesn't matter if you had fun for the first hour, hour and a half, even the first 2 hours. It doesn't matter. It's such a bad ending that everything that came before it is suddenly wiped out.
What was it in the movie? What was it, the movie adaptation, when he's talking to Robert McKee? And Robert McKee's like, well, what advice can you give me? And he's like, dude, just make a good ending. Just no one's going to give a shit about if this didn't work or this. If the ending works, people will like your movie regardless. And I will say you're not wrong in that, because when I'm assessing the other films in my head, even the ones I don't like as much as you do, they do have fun endings. There's just a funness about them that I kind of enjoy. And this one doesn't have that.
As much as I talked so much shit about Skyfall last episode, but I did say it ends on a high note.
It's bringing it back. We're bringing it back to the old school.
That's why sometimes certain movies are difficult to contend with, and Skyfall's one of them. That train sequence is so bad, but at least it doesn't end that way. At least the final sequence isn't the train sequence. You could just get up and go take a piss during the train sequence if you're like me and you hate it.
Going somewhere?
I'm gonna take a piss.
I think what you're saying is that the movie does a really great job of supporting its themes, regardless of how out of left field going to Skyfall may seem to some people. Forget the plot for a second. The movie's trying to build this story.
Yeah.
And that story is compelling because we care about those characters. We care about M. We think Silva's a really good villain. We care about Bond. So you're building all this up, and it's all about...
Sometimes the old ways are the best.
Old ways are best. That's the theme of the whole movie. And you're building up to that. So then when you get to the end of the movie, him dying, it's a great payoff. The whole thing pays off really great, right?
You've at least forgotten about the train sequence by then.
Right. That stuff still works.
If they'd never made Spectre, if they never would have made this movie, Craig would have had this trilogy of movies that ended in such a way that one could argue it to be a complete prequel trilogy. even though it takes place in the 2000s, you could still argue that it was a prequel trilogy, ending in M's office.
I look forward to our time together, Miss Moneypenny.
Becoming just like that which it was in Dr. No. Remember our argument about the usage of the gun barrel at the end as opposed to the beginning? You know, we argued about that in the Skyfall episode where I was like, why didn't they just start with the gun barrel? And you were like, no, they end with the gun barrel after we've reassembled classic M, classic Moneypenny, classic Q. And so one could argue that if Spectre and No Time to Die didn't exist, you would have this 3-film series of Casino, Quantum, and Skyfall that would create this weird kind of loop within the films where it's like you have those 3 movies, and then you have Dr. No, which is like a sequel to Skyfall in a sense, right?
Sure.
It's like everything's been set up. Now we go right into Dr. No. Then all the way through Die Another Day. Die Another Day has Judi Dench M, straight into Casino Royale, Judi Dench M, into Bond becoming Bond, into Skyfall that then leads into Dr. No. Like this weird loop of Bond movies, even though it takes place in the future. It would have been this prequel trilogy. That all gets thrown out the window the moment you bring Spectre in. Now Spectre kind of interrupts that and ruins that. So it basically, for me, it's like, if Spectre and No Time to Die didn't exist, I think that Daniel Craig's legacy would have been better. Unfortunately, you know, maybe his wallet wouldn't be as expansive.
I will say, I think with Bond, though, it really lands on how many movies have you done? And I think that kind of I think that has some weight. If you do 2 movies, you're kind of like, oh yeah, that guy. You do, but there's a bunch of reasons why that happened. I think the biggest reason is movies got more expensive. They don't chug them out like they did in the 60s and the 70s. Back in the day, they were doing almost a movie a year in the 60s.
Yeah.
For most of Connery's filmography, it was like within less than 10 years. But the later movies, the more the movies have come out, and then there was all the studio interference and all the studio issues that they've had over the years. You get 3, 4, or 5 years in between the movies coming out, and then it's like, it would have been nice I think it still would have been nice to have more Craig movies. I think this is a conversation we should save for when we talk about No Time to Die.
So let's just start at the beginning. The prologue. At the time, remember, rewind to the early 2010s.
Right.
It was a big trend at the time, specifically amongst the Latin filmmakers. Sam Mendes being one of them, Alfonso Cuarón, and Alejandro Iñárritu. And they're all friends, right? They were all spearheading the trend of, my movie does single takes. My movie does single takes. And Children of Men, I mean, single takes have been a thing forever, but it really came into the 2000s with Children of Men, where it's like these long 5-6 minute action scenes with no cuts, no editing, that were really impressive because they required some complex timing and all that. And so by the time you get to Spectre, Sam Mendes, who later did we mentioned 1917 in the last episode. 1917 was kind of where single takes died. In my opinion, it was because it was like, okay, we've gone too far. Sam Mendes is like, all his buddies are like, I did this single take and it was really impressive. I did this single take and it was really impressive. And he's like, F you guys, I made an entire movie that looks like it's all done in one take, and it's not good. I don't like 1917. When an entire movie is locked into a single camera perspective with no grounding principle within the story, it just ends up being flashy for the sake of flash and loses the emotional power that editing provides, versus something like Birdman.
Birdman works because it kind of justifies the idea of doing this long take because it's about the theater. And the theater is all about people and just being in this open space and seeing everything as it's happening all at once versus cutting, which is the opposite of that's what movies do. And I think that works for that movie.
Yes, it was Birdman. Gravity's one. There's all these movies with single takes, and they're all these Latino filmmakers that are buddy-buddy. And then Sam Mendes is like, well, I'm going to do that with the next Bond movie I do. So he's like, how about I do a prologue that is, it's not all a single take, but it's the opening shot is this single take that probably has some edits in there. There are moments where you can tell they
100%. I looked it up. Shots. They had to stitch it together.
Like when they go from outside to inside, that's clearly a moment where they did it.
I realized there was a problem with it. And my problem is it's not clever, or it doesn't give justification for the use of a single take. And I think the movie could have been more clever, and it's not. And I say that because in a movie like this, I want to be asking the question constantly, what's he doing? What's he doing next? Why is he going over there? Why is he watching that guy? I want to be constantly asking that question. But instead, what the movie does is he follows the guy, he goes in an elevator, all of a sudden the camera pans away, and then he's out of his costume. He's like, where are you going? Oh, I got to come back. That's it. And I kind of rewatching it, I'm like, I feel like there's a more clever thing that they could have done with this. I think even if it was a single take, there's more of a clever, like James Bond like is doing something or like following him, or like he stops and he waits and then he goes this way or something. There could have been something a little more clever.
It's extremely flashy. And I swear back to the very first time that I watched the movie, I felt exactly what you said you're feeling now, which is this is a single take for the sake of it being a single take, and not because it's servicing the story at that moment, which makes it bullshit. It's just Sam Mendes coming off the high of having made a very popular Bond film and being like, I'm going to just do the single take thing because I want to, because that is, I mean, we've talked about chasing trends so many times, and this is one of those instances where I'm like, yeah, they're just chasing trends and not for a good reason. This is just because at the time that, like I said, from Children of Men, where am I at? From Children of Men to 1917. 1917 is, I swear, the single take died after 1917. Other than cropping up in television shows here and there. I mean, even like It's Always Sunny did an episode that was a single take, and when I say that, it looks like a single take, but
it's the rope.
They hide
it's what
the
they
edits.
did in Rope.
It's the rope. It's
right.
the rope. They hide the edits. And those are always fun, but you have to do it because the subject matter, that which is going on in the scene itself, all of the above is serviced by the single take. I mean, even like True Detective Season 1 did a single take finale action sequence, and it serviced the tension going on. There's no tension in the opening of Spectre. It is purely style.
There's not a secret. Yeah, there's no like him running around and you're like,
all.
Is he going to get caught by this? They're making out. They swap costumes. They keep following him. Like, that would have been kind of neat. It's like, okay, we're with Bond in the mission, and we're seeing how he's
I like
going
that.
from
Now they're over
point
here.
A to
Now
B.
he traded his mask off for something else, and then they keep following the guy.
Now, like, that would have been cool, because then you're kind of seeing a progression, but it feels so flat, where he just goes up the elevator and changes out, and then he's like, I'll be back. And then we go back to traditional reverse shot filmmaking, and it's like, what was that?
What was the point of that? If they messed it up, they would have had to have the parade go all the way back. Yeah, who cares? Like, who cares?
They spend the money to do that.
It's
who
not
cares?
impressive.
They would have done it.
If the entire thing was one take, that'd be wildly impressive. But the helicopter thing was not ever going to be one take. So on top of that is this idea that what we start to see now are what I call the non-existent Bond girls. The really hot women that they put on the poster and they pretend are going to be a Bond girl, but really they just amount to a cameo. That very attractive Latina chick in the opening, she like did press junkets and stuff. Like, you're a Bond girl, you're a Bond girl. She's not a Bond girl. She's a non-existent Bond girl. She's just there to look hot in the beginning, and then she disappears.
She can now go to car shows, and they can be like, we have Bond girls. I swear.
Exactly. It's bull.
I swear there are car shows out there. There's so many car shows. They're like, oh yeah, we'll have Bond girls there, and they're just women who were like in the background, or they had one small minor appearance. They weren't like the main Bond girl in the movie.
The super hot redhead from Moonraker is more of a Bond girl than this chick. Like, it's ridiculous. But they keep doing this because we live in this socio-political environment. Again, as history has shown with Bond movies, periodically, like clockwork, every generation gets offended by Bond having sex with women.
Yeah.
So they just go, well, let's have it both ways. Let's just have Bond with a really hot chick, but he never has sex with her, but she's there long enough to be put on the poster so we can pretend that she's the new Bond girl, but in the story, she's irrelevant.
I would have thought she would have been an agent. Like, she could have been another MI6 agent that was with Bond. Like, kind of like, oh, we're jumping into another story, and like, this is him on a mission.
She didn't need to be there. There was no need for her to be in the scene other than they wanted to put her on the poster. I'm so cynical about this, and we'll see it more in the future, because it's like, it's politically incorrect for Bond to have sex with women now. So we're going to have it both ways. We'll put her in, but then he won't have sex with her. And we'll just hope that, we please the old fans and we please the PC, woke crowd. It's ridiculous. So anyway, moving on. What you said about Mr. Green back in Quantum was that the movie would have been more streamlined if he had been combined with Vesper's boyfriend. I disagreed back then, but now what you said back then applies here, where C kind of has this overall feeling of he should be the main bad guy, but he's not. And so he ends up just being secondary. It should have just been the one bad guy. I'll take it a step further, though, and say that if you were going to do this thing where it's like, okay, Blofeld can't be somebody who's in the British government. I said last episode that the woman who was like the mistress of something.
Yeah. The person that's like in the front and
who's grilling M.
You'll forgive me for not putting up the bunting.
She should have been C, or Andrew Scott should have been that character. Either way, it should have been the same person, because the whole time watching Skyfall, I'm like, why is this chick so bloodthirsty for M's head and for the 00 section? Well, wouldn't it have just made sense that she would have been Spectre and or Quantum, and that she would then, her character would have continued on as C in this movie? Then it would have been like, oh my God, back in Skyfall, she was representing Blofeld trying to destroy them.
It's as if you insist on pretending we still live in a golden age of espionage.
You must know by now that the 00 program is officially dead.
I disagree with that idea only because I think her character was more supposed to be a politician, where I think C is meant to be more inside the it would be like saying,
because you watch Skyfall. You watch Skyfall and you just go, this is just a politician trying to get political points. But then in Spectre, it's like, oh, she was working for Blofeld. No wonder she's trying to kill the 00 section.
Then you can connect all those things.
Because C comes out of nowhere. Whereas if C was that person who was the person grilling M, it at least would have been like, oh, that's why they were so ruthless. Okay. Then on top of that, you could put Blofeld, because Blofeld informed Skyfall. Again, breadcrumbs. Instead, you don't have anything. C comes out of nowhere and Blofeld comes out of nowhere.
Right. Let me lay out my Blofeld crap real quick.
Okay.
Specifically, the Blofeld reveal. Just his reveal. Just him saying, my name is Ernest. My name is Ernest. Ernst Stravos Blofeld. It's the most meta the film ever gets.
Three names you just can't pronounce.
I can't pronounce any of them. It is the equivalent to Star Trek Into Darkness, where Cumberbatch reveals he's actually been Khan this whole time. Like, it's a huge revelation, but no one in universe cares. They're like, who? If you were in that universe, you wouldn't care. But the movie plays it off like it's, oh my gosh, this guy's Blofeld.
Consul Bowser died 20 years ago, James, in an avalanche alongside his father. The man you're talking to now is Ernst Stavro Blofeld.
Catchy name.
The audience is like, ooh, but in canon, in situ,
in the story,
within the
universe,
nobody cares or knows.
Either my fix or like what I would have said is like if Blofeld was name dropped in a previous film, or they were actually looking for Blofeld in this movie leading up to the end of the movie, they didn't know who Blofeld was, and then maybe they did some sort of bait and switch, and Opperhauser was actually not Blofeld, it was really C, or they weren't so advert about Christoph Waltz being Blofeld in the movie with the cat and all that stuff. If they weren't so advert with it for the fans, then reveal it to be Blofeld, it might have worked. Yet to hide the character's name just for the fans, because this is exactly what they did for Star Trek Into Darkness. They told people, oh no, Cumberbatch isn't playing Khan, he's playing some character named John, whatever. I don't remember what it was. And then the movie's like, my name is Khan. And you're like, I know who that is, but why is that a big deal for everybody in the movie?
Am I supposed to be impressed?
I think we're meant to be impressed.
You're pandering to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Why didn't
exactly.
He could have just been John, and he would have been a better character. But now you're treating me like I'm an idiot by being like, Khan.
My name is Khan.
Ernst Stavro Blofeld, and all the stupid people freak out. You can't just reference. You have to earn. You have to develop. You have to characterize. It's insulting.
There's a part of me as I watch this movie, it feels like C was intentionally going to be the main villain in somebody's script.
Yes.
And then they were like, they just shoved in this plot. They're like, let's shove in Spectre. Do I have a book? Do I have Thunderball? Let's shove in Thunderball.
They literally doubled everything.
The script.
They doubled everything. It was like, okay, we have C and we have Blofeld. We have CNS, the building, and we have the Moroccan Desert Information Center, right? 2 bad guys, 2 information centers, which screams that it was one script that they were just like, double everything and throw in Blofeld.
In my head, would have made this movie way better is if they had mentioned Blofeld, like he learned who's the head of Spectre, but not revealing that it's Franz.
Yeah.
And maybe even keeping that brother plot, but leading the audience into a direction thinking, oh, Franz is actually Blofeld or something along those lines. Or it's like he really thinks Franz is Blofeld and he's about to kill him. And then you find out that C has been actually Blofeld this whole time. Like, I think that would have been a better reveal. Again, that actor, Andrew Scott, could have been a good Blofeld as well because he had already played Moriarty in Sherlock, which was also just an equally menacing
It's
arch
obviously
nemesis
why
for
they
Bond.
cast him, because they chased trends
Exactly.
and they're like, this worked, so let's bring him over here.
Yeah.
My fix would have been, give us flashbacks. Bond has never had flashbacks, but if you're going to do this whole thing of Bond's childhood, give us some flashbacks so we have some context. If we had flashbacks, that would have made returning to Skyfall all the more meaningful rather than contrived. Talked about that last episode. It also would have established why Bond chose the path of good and Blofeld the path of bad or evil. But instead, all we get is this one very quick, very lazy explanation.
This cuckoo made me realize my father's life had to end. In a way, he's responsible for the path I took. So thank you, cuckoo.
We know why Silva went bad. Silva used to be like Bond and then he went bad. We know why, because of his whole Cain and Abel relationship with M.
It was you who betrayed me.
But why not Bond? Why didn't Bond choose evil?
Why become criminal?
If we don't see him hanging out with Blofeld's dad, basically that would give us some context as to why Bond chose good. Think of James Bond. He's an orphan. His parents died. He's bitter at the world. He's probably bitter at existence, God, call it what you want, that his parents were robbed from him. He's very likely to turn into a criminal. So then what does he have? He has this father figure in Hans Oberhauser who would then teach Bond how to be a man and why he should be a good man. But then you also have the other brother, Blofeld, who chooses evil ultimately. But we don't have any context as to why one chose one path and the other chose the other path. You would think that Franz would turn out to be the good guy and Bond, the orphan whose parents were killed, who's bitter at the world, would turn to evil. Give us some flashbacks to solidify that so that we as an audience can follow that. Instead, you just get old Blofeld bitching for 2 hours about his dead dad, who we have no context.
Uh-oh. Someone had some daddy issues.
So it just ends up being so flat where it could have been great. Remember in Batman Begins specifically, he almost took revenge against the guy who killed his parents. That would have been him choosing the path of evil because he felt like he'd been f***ed over by existence itself. This would have helped Skyfall even. This would have helped all of the Daniel Craig movies to give us a context as to why Bond became a good person. Again, why become criminal? Without that, Bond arbitrarily chooses good. Well, why? When you had the opportunity, you literally go back to his childhood home. You literally then have this father figure who mentored him. You had all this fruit you could harvest as to why James Bond is good and not evil, and you don't capitalize on it. Instead, you just have Blofeld bitching about his dad, who we never meet. We talk a lot about wasted opportunities. This is like the #1 wasted opportunity ever.
The way that they position Blofeld's source of his evil or his wrongdoing or his carelessness against the law or whatever you call it just boils down to my father cared more about this other boy than he cared about me. Therefore, I become evil.
For me, this is a dad issue. Dad issue! Dad! Deadbeat dad! Daddy didn't love me!
That's what it seems like it boils down to.
I don't just become evil. I create the most sinister global cabal of criminals to ever exist.
It's the plot of Austin.
So
what
ridiculous.
was it in Austin Powers? Like,
Yes.
didn't they literally do this in the last Austin Powers movie?
Dr. Evil's not your son. I am.
You both are.
What?
John Logan just got really drunk and watched Austin Powers and forgot that he watched Austin Powers and just started typing this whole silly brother plot.
I've seen bigger. That's
Just a little prick. It's a flu shot.
Now, you may feel a small
Christ.
prick.
Last time, Bond and Silva were metaphorical brothers, and that is the reason why we ranked it so high. Because of
It
all the
works.
meaning
That-
there.
all that
That
stuff
all works.
worked.
They weren't actual brothers. Like I said in my opener, it's like Star Wars. It's like you're literally going to say that they're related to the point where if Bond had never existed, then Spectre wouldn't exist. That's so dumb. That is so unforgivably dumb. I cannot possibly get over that. Like you're saying that Spectre wouldn't be a thing if James Bond had never been born, let alone his parents had died. That is too. I mean, I mocked you a little bit last time because you were basically giving Bond the Phoenix metaphor, you know, everything reborn, and I'm like, yeah, what the f does that have to do with Bond? Bond is just a guy who defeats bad guys. He's just a spy. He's just a normal spy who's just really good at his job. To suddenly say that the very existence of Spectre and literally everything that's ever happened in all of these movies, none of it would have happened. Lashif wouldn't exist. Green, Silva, none of them would exist if James Bond had never been born. It's just like, it's just too much. It's way too self-aggrandizing. It's way too self-important to be taken seriously. When it comes to Spectre, though, committing acts of terrorism worldwide so that different world governments will submit their freedom for security.
More data, more analysis, less likelihood of terrorist attack.
That's classic Spectre stuff. It's everything I talked about in Quantum of Solace, and I love it.
The Terra Project is just one small part of a global network of eco-parks that Green Planet has created to rejuvenate the world on the verge of collapse.
Then what's the water?
This is the world's most precious resource. We need to control as much of it as we can.
I do love what's going on with Spectre in this movie, how the powers that be weaponize the innate fears of the dumb masses to centralize power. We see it throughout the movie. They're committing acts of terrorism in order to get those countries to vote for giving up their freedom.
Alone, we are weak. Together, we're a global power.
An unelected one.
They go to the vote, and then they don't.
Yeah.
South America's the only one who doesn't vote. And then, of course, we don't see it, but we hear it that they say there was a bombing in South America. Oh, guess who?
South Africa.
Now
South
voted
Africa
and changed
just
their mind.
got bombed, and now they vote for Nine Eyes.
South Africans on board, I take it?
Yeah, well, who can blame them?
Where's your tinfoil hat? That's some tinfoil hat stuff. That's called a false flag, so on and so forth. Spectre's global control in this is a theme that I love. Obviously, I've talked about it before. I love the theme of freedom versus security. Give us your freedom. That's what C is saying. He's like, we need more surveillance and not less. Give us your freedom, and we'll give you security, but in the long term, we'll control both. That is classic Spectre. That stuff's brilliant, but that's not what the movie is about. The movie is more so about Bond and Blofeld.
The story, that's why I say it's like the plot versus the story. And it's
Yeah.
like, yes, there's that theme that you just said, but like the story stuff, the same that to the equivalent of the Silva M. Bond story in the previous film, is supposed to be this brother story that really, like you're just saying, it really screws up with a lot of stuff, and it's frustrating.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? My biggest problem with this is I think this film, I feel like the stakes, one, aren't as great because it's such a blanket thing. It's just such a, like, they want surveillance, but there's nothing tangible. There's not a very, very specific reason why if they don't get this, if this happens, yada, yada. But this film doesn't mention any of what Spectre could do or gain from this when we already see they're spying on MI6 earlier in the film.
Looks like you've had dealings with him before. Quantum.
Of course, Mr. White.
Maybe it's the fate of spies to just disappear.
So then you're like, well, why do they need this if they can already spy on MI6?
Yeah.
Like that's like the movie does it's like, okay, well, we have this scene where
The
they spy on
system's going to go online with a ticking clock, and you're
who
like,
cares? You already saw MI6.
The system's already online.
Skyfall already makes mention of like Silva. Like if Silva is connected to Spectre, Doesn't he already have the capability to hack?
If Silva actually was under the control of Blofeld, because they retroactively said that Silva is part of Spectre, which is bullshit. When you watch Skyfall, you're like, this guy's like Goldfinger. He's on his own.
It goes completely. You're right.
He's
It goes
on his
completely
own
against him.
If he was under Blofeld, Blofeld would say, hey, dude, hold your horses. I'll let you get your revenge once the global intelligence system goes online. And again, behind the scenes, it was because they didn't have the rights to Spectre and all that BS that you and I and everybody else is aware of.
Yeah.
So, like I said, Spectre retroactively fucks with a better movie, which is Skyfall.
If you wanted, you could pick your own secret missions, as I do.
James Bond and Silva, they're opposites, right? James Bond is about tradition, but he's also he's for His Majesty's government. He works for somebody. He believes in being a part of a cause greater than his own. Silva's all about himself. He wants nothing to do with working for other people. He wants to be top brass. He wants to do his own thing. So then the suggestion that he's a part of Spectre, it's like, he would never join Spectre. You'd be like, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
I want to do my own missions.
I want to be like Goldfinger. I want to be on my... Goldfinger was not a part of Spectre. He just was, I do my own thing. And so if Thunderball retroactively was like, Goldfinger had this ring, it's like, no, that defeats the character of Goldfinger. Goldfinger would not join your organization. He would just do his own thing. Do you find it odd that it seems like M knew about Spectre? She at least knew about Scarpia or whatever his name is.
Sciara. The breadcrumb that she leaves, as much as I like it in a vacuum, I like the idea. Because I can easily see them being sitting around and be like, how do we start the next movie? What do we do? What if there was a tape that Bond got after she died? And it was like some piece of information, and that led him to something. I like that. I think that's a cool idea.
When he says...
She wasn't going to let death get in the way of her job.
I think is such a great final detail for her. Like Daniel Craig just being like, this is how awesome she was. Like I said with Skyfall, there's things I love and hate. There are things in this movie that I do love, and that's one of them. I mean, probably one of my favorite Bond moments ever is the sound that guy makes when Bond... Was she looking into this stuff? Did she feel so bad about what happened back in Quantum that she was like by herself looking into what Spectre was?
What the hell is this organization, Bond? How can they be everywhere and we know nothing about them?
Clearly she knew about Spectre.
Find a man called Marco Sciara. Kill him and don't miss the funeral.
On face value, as just being the writer in the room, you're like, yeah, this is a cool idea. But then it's like, okay, but the implications of it, is it that she knew about it? But then why does she want this guy killed? Was there anything specific?
She knew that Blofeld would show up. The implication is that she knew so much about Bond's past.
You know the whole story.
That maybe she knew about Oberhauser. That's as far as I can take it logically. And it's just like, oh, it's so dumb. It's so dumb.
Well, yeah, because then it's like, well, what does she know about Oberhauser? Like, what did he do?
Yeah.
Like, how does she, and then that begs the question, and then it's just like, oh, well, then she knew about Spectre. And you're like,
it's hard.
That's dumb.
It's dumb. Yeah.
That's dumb.
On that note, moving on to the Spectre rings, just setting it up. Bond sees Scarpia. I may need to ADR that name.
Sciara.
Men's asses!
In the beginning, he shows that guy that he's got the ring, so Bond is like, oh, that ring is significant. And then in the helicopter, he rips it off of him, and then he uses that to get into the Spectre meeting in Italy. And then fast forward to the clinic. Out of nowhere, Q shows up just to deliver a warning.
Either you come back in and do this through proper channels, or I go directly to M.
Q would know where Bond is because of the smart blood.
Smart blood allows us to track your movements in the field.
But at the same time, he's obviously only there, like the writers wrote him being there physically because he needed to physically retrieve the ring. But I think that's just sloppy. If the script didn't require Q to physically retrieve the ring, Q just would have called him.
Well, maybe it's because if he goes there, they can't call him. They can't be like, well, where's Q at? They're like, I don't know. He went to some clinic. Oh, he's just got his day off.
I think it's
sloppy.
It's literally just because he needed to physically
give him the ring. It's just so that they can get that ring. And the ring is my least, like, again, when I watched this movie, the very first time I saw this movie in theaters, it was the moment I realized this was not going to be a good movie. Because leading up to that, I think the movie's actually really fun. And then that moment is just like, no.
Yeah. He puts it on a thing on his laptop and he's analyzing it. The first thing I'll say is that they at least, by way of the ring and then later with Blofeld, they at least acknowledged Green once or twice in the movie. I think you see his photo early on, and Q has got some things going on his laptop, and you see some stuff. But if you freeze frame it and figure out what's going on, they have two things, okay? So there's a mineral that is being detected called rhyodite. This is what I think is clever, but they never expand upon it, kind of like the C thing. They never make it known. Rhyodite is a mineral associated with meteorite impact events. Which is, of course, a significant part of the movie where later in Morocco, we're at a point where a meteor impacted the Earth. That whole scene takes place in a meteor impact crater.
It's a meteorite.
The very meteorite which made this crater.
So that's clever, but never made clear, so it doesn't matter. The whole idea is essentially that all of the baddies from the previous films were exposed to the rhyodite. So what you're seeing on those toxicology reports that, Q is seeing, because he's like connected to the MI6 servers clearly, and it's detecting this rhyodite. Does that mean that it was in their lungs because they were at the crater or it was on their body or maybe in them or in their bodies? But then later when he's like, all these people are connected and they're all linked by one man.
Oberhauser is still alive. The ring proves it. And it seems they were all part of one organization. Le Chiffre, Quantum, Sciarra, your friend Mr. Silver. And do you know who links them all?
And then the arrow points at Blofeld and it's like, DNA match. Okay, so wait, where'd you get the DNA? Is the DNA off the ring? Is the DNA from the MI6 servers? The fingerprints on the ring were from the Italian Scorpio guy and Mr. White because they had both handled the ring. So, of course, their prints would be on it. But to then say that the DNA is on it...
Franz Oberhauser is dead. Dead and buried.
Did Q get a sample of his DNA off the ring? If so, how did he have a sample of Han's DNA to compare it to if they never found his body after the avalanche? So basically what they're telling us is that they don't have Blofeld's fingerprints, but they do have his DNA? Not only does that not make any sense at all, but Blofeld's not the type of guy to just let his DNA be on a server somewhere. He would have had Silva scrub that a long time ago.
But easy.
But it's like rhyodite, DNA, fingerprints, all these things at once, and it's all stupid because eventually Q's just like, it's all connected, and you're like, my intelligence is being insulted. This is stupid.
So let me go into this, because this is the part of the movie that I hate the most. Like it just, every time I see it, I was just like, oh God. The Spectre graphic, regardless of how stupid it is, right? I can buy Le Chiffre, I could buy Mr. White, I could buy Quantum, but as we've already said, Silva? That doesn't make sense. But even worse, Patrice? What? So this goes down a whole other rabbit hole for me with Spectre specifically, because it feels like the art department was like, oh, we have this squid graphic that we're going to use, the Spectre graphic for the new movie. Cool. Mendez is like, hey, I want to put like the photo. So I want to put like Oberhauser up here. And then I want to put all the villains on the tentacles because they're part of Spectre, right? And they go, okay. And then they're like, wait a minute, we don't have enough. Oh, okay. Well, I directed the last movie. You can put Patrice in there. And they're like,
no,
sure.
Sir, Patrice was just like a mercenary.
He's like a henchman.
He's just a hired gun.
Right.
No,
so,
he was number 15. Even Le Chiffre was not a member of Spectre. Le Chiffre was just a guy contracted.
He's an accountant
to make
He's a
them money.
contracted guy.
Mr. White was Quantum.
Right.
Tell them I'll get the money.
Money isn't as valuable to our organization as knowing who to trust.
I think it shows that at least they're like trying to show the hierarchy, but like it screws the hierarchy system completely from Spectre, because from Russia with Love, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, it makes total sense. Blofeld's number one, and then he has these agents who are in charge of these operations.
Number 5,
Our consultation fee for the British train robbery, £250,000.
Number 11.
The Spectre number people are essentially the evil counterpart to MI6's double O's, 1 through 9. However, the double O's don't have a hierarchy, whereas in Spectre, the lower your number is, the higher your ranking is in the organization.
We do see this in the movie. Like, we see this whole table scene, and there's different people, and they're different heads, and they have their own, like, ranking. But, like, it's the understanding that, like, if you're Largo, who's number 2, Largo is essentially like a big Bond bad, but he's like under Blofeld, who's like, you're going to do this operation and screw with Miami. You're going to do this operation and screw with Russia and the United States. You're going to do this. And they have all of their henchmen. So then to suggest that Patrice is on the same level of that hierarchy, if that is the case, it's stupid. It's ludicrous.
It's just
and
pandering.
Then it makes me mad.
Oh, you like Skyfall?
But the DNA thing is so coincidental. Like, it's just like, it would be like just to suggest that, like, oh, hey, we shook hands one time and my DNA got on your ring. And so, oh, he must be a part of the organization.
DNA doesn't stick around that long. So that's what I mean. It's like, and it actually is up to debate. It's like, is the DNA, is that because it was physically on the ring itself, or is that DNA from MI6 files? Either way, they should not have any inclination as to who Blofeld is. Like, Blofeld being at the top, it shouldn't have had a picture with the DNA match.
That's so stupid.
Of Oberhauser. It should have just been a question mark of who's at the top, and Bond would be like, I think I know who's at the top because I saw him and I have a personal connection to him that goes back to my childhood, to the point where Q would be confused what he's talking about. Instead, we need to make it clear for the idiots in the audience. Hey, Bond, it turns out every adventure you've ever had is connected by this one guy.
Right. Part of the problem is that scene is such a like fast-paced thing where he's like trying to figure it out and he's typing all this stuff. But we don't sit to pause long enough because they want to get just to the graphic really quick. So had Q just explained it and been like, what's interesting is I also looked up, there's a bunch of people from your past that also, for some reason, have this in their toxicology reports, and then all boom, it's Green, it's Mr. White, it's like all these other players that he's run into, and it wouldn't and then not do it as a stupid graphic, but then it would make it suggest like these are all weirdly connected, like there might be something connected, but being like a little more vague and not putting a stupid Spectre graphic would have cleaned it up.
Speaking of Q, let's talk about the Q scenes. So
okay.
We're back in Q's lab for real. The way Q's lab should have been in Skyfall. That was one of my gripes with Q in Skyfall. Was like, why are we in a museum?
In this movie, he's back to being the old Q.
He's back to being normal Q. Suddenly gadgets are cool again.
Like they had never gone out of style. Like they'd always been there.
Like everything Q said in Skyfall about like, yeah, gadgets are stupid.
Were you expecting an exploding pen? We don't really go in for that anymore.
That's all gone. They immediately are just like, oh no, Q's all about gadgets again. It's like, okay, don't you understand that you just contradicted that one movie ago? So after all that talking shit about exploding pens, Q makes an exploding watch.
The alarm is rather loud.
It just feels like they flipped the character because somebody commented, some Chucky Rants out there was like, why does Q hate gadgets? That was his whole thing. And then the producer's like, oh yeah, you're right. Q did like gadgets. Okay, well, the next movie we'll make sure that we rectify that. And they're like, yeah, okay.
I'd rather they have just stuck with what they did previously. Last episode, you had some thoughts about the DB5. I want to hear those. You didn't exactly complete your thought. I want to hear your thought. But first, I want to say that they referenced the exploded DB5, the DB5 that Silva killed. And he says,
I believe I said bring it back in one piece, not bring back one piece.
You know, a classic Q line. You know, bring the equipment back in one piece.
Do please try and return some of this equipment in pristine order.
And I'm like, when would that have been said? I thought this was Bond's personal car. I thought Bond won this DB5 in a poker game. And yeah, it got souped up with gadgets at some point, but when? I thought that he was the new quartermaster.
I'm your new quartermaster.
When would he have taken the DB5 and put gadgets in it? So again, I feel like my intelligence is as a fan, as a viewer, is being assaulted again. So Q hooked Bond up with that DB5 apparently, and yet it's not equipped with an MI6 tracker. I thought that was the whole thing about switching cars in the last movie.
Trouble with company cars is they have trackers.
And also Bond won it in a card game. Like there's all these contradictions where it's like there's no through line between Skyfall and Spectre. It's all confused bullshit. It's ridiculous.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So this is my thought process on this whole thing, and it's frustrated me. The first time the DB5 shows up, it's a reference. It's like, oh, that's cute. DB5 from Goldfinger that everyone remembers.
You'll be using this Aston Martin DB5 with modifications.
It's just a car, though. And even that movie plays the idea of gadgets and stuff very low-key, and it's like even on the same realm as like Honor Majesty's Secret Service. We're like, yeah, gadgets are kind of very minor. We're not going to do super spy stuff. It's going to be spy stuff, right? But then when you get to Skyfall, I have the feeling that the writers or producers were like, you know what, screw it. We're going to bring back the DB5. It's not going to be a reference. It's almost going to be like in-universe. Again, this is like a in-universe issue. It's like, in-universe, we're going to bring back the DB5 from Goldfinger. Okay, well, what does that mean for this universe? Because you've already said, you've come out and said we're rebooting James Bond, and that this Daniel Craig James Bond is not the previous ones, which the previous ones are technically connected as being like, yeah, it's supposed to be the same guy, even though the years pass, but like no one bats an eye.
Yeah.
So there's some weird universe thing going on there. But then this, it's like, okay, well, now we're saying that this DB5 has these gadgets that are low-tech gadgets in a world with computers and stuff. What's the answer here? Is it that they had, Q Branch has this DB5 from an agent from the 60s that had it? Is this the DB5 from Casino Royale that he got and then he got weapons on it?
Are you going to complain the whole way?
Oh, go on then, eject me.
Eject a seat, you're joking.
It's just such a weird, muddy, messy thing where I'm like, it's not a reference. It feels more like between Quantum and Skyfall, you could suggest that other James Bond adventures where he did get these items did take place, but it isn't clean. It's just kind of a headcanon story idea that you're like, oh yeah, that maybe Goldfinger happened in the Goldfinger story. Maybe not exactly how it's told in the movie, but it happened between those two movies.
If they would have name dropped Goldfinger, I would have welcomed
You're like,
that.
oh yeah, this was from the Goldfinger mission or Operation Grand Slam, Bond, but they don't do it.
The silent henchman, he's mute, but he's not, right? Like he's quiet. He's silent, just like Oddjob and Jaws, but he's not mute. This goes all the way back to our first real argument from Russia with Love versus Goldfinger, where we talked about Red Grant versus Oddjob, where you and Scott waxed poetic about Oddjob and how he's so great because he never speaks, right? And at the time I was like, that's what? Just because a guy doesn't speak doesn't make him cool. Oddjob's cool, but it's not just because he's mute. Back then, I hated that argument, and I hate it now. And I don't think anybody's saying Mr. Hinx is cool, but I hated that because it's like, it's not just because he's silent. It's because of what they do, right? And Mr. Hinx is just like, there's nothing behind this guy. Scott later admitted that he only likes Oddjob because of GoldenEye 64. Like, after that episode, he admitted that. I was like, you asshole. I hope somebody kidnaps you and ties you up somewhere sometime, Scott. But Oddjob is cool. Don't get me wrong. But the idea that he's cool just because he's mute is stupid. And this movie proves that. It's not just because of being mute and not saying much. You have to give them something to do. You have to give them some reason for us to like them.
He doesn't. Yeah, you're right. So like, okay, to your point, I'm still not going to back down from my argument there. I do think he's cool because he doesn't have to. And like, let me be clear. Talking about Oddjob, not Mr. Hinx, but I think he's still cool because he doesn't have to say anything to get his point across. But even in like, he still has a personality. I never said this at the time, but I think he had a personality too. I think there was something kind of fun about like the fact that he could, like Bond would do something and then he would just break something in front of him and just like prove his might. And like that stuff I thought was fun. And it gave him just a little bit more, right? But I think to your point with this movie with Mr. Hinx is just an animal let off his chain, but doesn't really give that much of a personality. The only time we get to see a little bit who this guy is just the first time we see him, and he walks out, he kills that dude really quickly and violently, and it's aggressive, and I think it's a good opener for a character, but we don't get like a scene where maybe we see him at like the funeral or something, like the after party at the funeral.
Anything.
We see him at the after party of the funeral, anything like that. If we saw that.
Anything.
And he's eating like the scene I want to write for this movie is they're at the funeral. It's the after party of the funeral because Bond's like, well, I got to stick around and see who else shows up. And so they're at the after party where they have little snacks for the people grieving and stuff. And then we actually like cut to Mr. Hinx, and he's got his like the first shot we see is like his hands, and we see his thumbnail, and then he grabs like a little escargot and then he picks it up, and like it's just tight close up, and he like puts it in his mouth and he eats it, and the camera pans back. That's the scene I want to add.
This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but that's so much better than anything we get from Mr. Hinx out of this. I mean, it's so flat and empty. Him, Blofeld C. It's like the opposite of GoldenEye, where all of the bad guys, you understand all of them, and they're all really fun and really distinct and enjoyable. With this, none of the bad guys have enough to be like, I love any single one of them. They're all flat. The first thing that Hinx does is have the car chase with Bond. For some reason, he's the only one who manages to catch up with Bond. Whatever.
Wouldn't have not been better had the chase been this. Like, they get in their cars, but there's more henchmen because it's Spectre, and they're all like, go get him. And they all get into these nice, like it's Fast and the Furious basically in Rome, right?
Yeah.
And they're all in these cars, and Bond gets in the DB10, and he's driving, and it's not just a one-on-one, it's like and there's all these cars, and they're all racing after him. And then, lo and behold, Bond has all the cool gadgets. The first time in a Craig movie, we see that, and he's taking out one by one all these cars.
Dude, what if Hinx was taking out other Spectre guys because he wants to be the one to kill Bond?
Even better.
That would have been cool.
That would have been awesome. And then, and then it would have been like just down to the last two cars. How cool would that have been? But we didn't get that.
But instead, the car chase is the first goofiness in the Craig era that we see. Yes, the Craig era has seen some humor. You can have humor in the darkest of times. Levity, yes.
Right. Are you going to take this or make me wait?
Certainly, sir.
But this is the first time that it's like, there's goofy stuff going on in that chase scene, and there's goofy stuff then throughout the movie that we'll get to. As far back as Diamonds Are Forever, we talked about this, where it's like inevitably franchises become self-aware and they get goofy. And so you get that several times, and that starts in the car chase.
No.
So that gets goofy, but it does lead to one of the coolest Bond moments ever. I love when Bond lands with the parachute. It's so smooth and badass.
It's very Brosnan.
Right?
It's very this.
Yes.
It's very Brosnan. I don't hate that car chase, but it does leave me more to be desired because you do question it after the fact. You're like, well, wouldn't more people be chasing after him? Would it not just be a single guy?
The entirety of Spectre is in one place, and only
it's
one
like,
guy.
Why can't they just? Why can't they send more henchmen? Like there's tons of them. We already met the doofuses out front. Like, why not there be more? And then why not, could there have been more cars? You had that whole parking lot with all these dope cars. I know it's probably expensive to buy like 50 Lamborghinis, but, with this movie's budget, who gives a shit? Yeah. Like, why not?
Let's talk about Mr. White and his daughter, Miss Swann. The Mr. White scene might be the best scene in the film. I don't know if you got something better than that, but I do love that scene.
The one good puzzle piece that they had in their back pocket was the fact that they didn't kill him off in Quantum, and they had him. And they were like, oh, we'll bring him back.
Yeah.
The one piece that they were like, had they just waited another year and just maybe cleaned up the draft a little bit, they definitely could have capitalized on that a lot more than they did. Because it is the best scene in the movie. And I remember it in the trailer where he's like,
you're a kite dancing in a hurricane, Mr. Bond.
Dancing in a hurricane. It's such a poignant line that you're like, this is great.
If only the movie by the end would have brought to life that beautiful metaphor of a kite in a hurricane, which, I mean, speaking of which, Sam Mendes with the plastic bag floating around like
you got to edit that in.
Exactly.
You got to edit that in.
There's so much beauty.
Your guy dancing
He's like, you're just like any standing guy, and then we cut to the
beautiful plastic bag.
You're a kite dancing in a hurricane, Mr. Bond. So long.
You want to see the most beautiful thing I've ever filmed? This bag was just
Turn this off.
dancing with me. Like a little kid begging me to play with it.
This is important.
I said, turn it off!
I want you to understand something.
But it helps me remember. I need to remember. Sometimes there's so much beauty in the world.
Madeleine.
I feel like I can't take it.
Look at me.
And my heart is just going to cave in.
Look at me.
The things that bring people together. Out of horror, beauty.
Perfect. Love it. American Beauty.
To that point, though, that's one of my biggest gripes is, and we'll get to this, we'll get to where I think the movie should have gone in the end. But all we need to know for now is that, wow, what a great visual metaphor for where Bond is. He's never been in such a dire situation, but then later he gets out of it extremely easily. So it's ridiculous. But what we'll say for now, until we get there, in their conversation, basically what it becomes is, okay, Mr. White, you're in a bad position. You're no longer in a state of friendship, I guess, with Blofeld.
I found thallium in my cell phone. It's done its job. I have a few weeks.
You're protecting someone.
Who is he protecting? He determines that it's a daughter. He says, though, he's like, my daughter's already safe.
You won't find her. She's clever.
If she was in trouble, then logically Mr. White would have made a deal with Bond. But that's not what we get. Instead, it's Bond's like, I can protect her. And Mr. White's like, she's fine. She knows how to hide. So what bargaining chip does Bond have? He just says, I'll find her and I'll protect her.
It sounds like a rewrite situation. It sounds like you and I writing a script and I wrote something and you're like, no, it should be this. And then somebody else came back. It's like, no, I changed it to this. There's 4 people on this movie.
Understand this. Because Bond goes to find Madeleine, the bad guys find her.
Did it cross your mind that you led them to me?
So Mr. White should have been like, no, dude, she's fine. I mean, she would have been fine. But where would she not have been fine? Bond would say, hey, if this global surveillance thing comes online, they will find Madeleine. Look, dude, I know she knows how to hide, but nobody can hide from this global surveillance system. That would have been enough motivation for White to say, okay, she's at this clinic.
That whole plot is like on the periphery.
But if you need to convince this man who's not going to help you because he used to be your enemy,
right,
and
but
his
he has,
only
at this
interest
point
is his
in the
daughter,
movie, he has no idea that these things are connected. Like at that point, he doesn't know. At that point for him.
Let's say you and I are rewriting it. What I'm saying is you have that. You have like, how do I convince my old enemy to help me out? And then you also have like this global surveillance thing. I'm saying move those scenes earlier and then boom, Bond could be like, hey, you and I need to team up because your daughter is f***ed, bro. Like, Mr. White, your daughter's f***ed. That then gives Mr. White that push to be like, I have no choice but to put my trust in James Bond.
Sure.
That's what I'm saying. Regardless of where the scenes shook out in the end, that's what that would have been a natural way of putting them on the same page.
But back to the Spectre hierarchy stuff, it is frustrating that they didn't just go, oh yeah, Mr. White was number 2.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. He was number 2, and now he's off the board, and then he's hiding because he knows he was going to get killed. And there's a new number 2 or a 3 or whatever. Bond fans would be like, oh
yeah, that would have been like
he was number 2 this whole time.
Would have been great.
That would have worked.
So as it goes, Mr. White is like, here's how you can find my daughter. You're going to protect her. It vaguely rings of like the whole Skyfall and Man with the Golden Gun thing of somebody being like, if I put my trust in you, you will kill the bad guy, right? Like, it's clear that Mr. White wants Blofeld dead, but involving his daughter whatsoever is stupid. It's stupid because for some reason, even though every major player in Spectre has been to the crater layer, as proven by the Reodite toxicology reports, Mr. White is the only one who has never received an invitation, which makes no sense. You're telling me that Lashif has been to the crater, but not White? But then later we find out that he did know where the crater layer is. When they find White's secret room, he already had the coordinates for the crater layer tacked to the wall, so he already knew where Blofeld was.
He was looking for him. And he sent me here to finish the job.
So he could have just told Bond the location and completely left his daughter out of the plot to ensure her safety.
You save her.
But that's not what's laid out. Instead, Bond's just like, I'll protect her. And he's like, well, what do I need your help for? And Bond's like, I don't know. I won't kill you. You can kill yourself, though. It's so sloppy. And that's this whole movie in a nutshell, is it's sloppy. Right. It's like, again, it's like they went with the first draft.
She can lead you to l'Americain. She knows l'Americain. Try the Huffler Clinic.
The clue he gives Bond is go to this clinic. Well, what is that mountaintop clinic a clear reference to, McCurdy?
On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah, it is a clinic on the top of a mountain with a runway, kind of reminiscent, therefore, of GoldenEye as well. So it's kind of both in one. And then also a bit of For Your Eyes Only with the skiers in line that then interrupt the bad guys from messing with the good guy. Remember with Q?
Not only that, but like think about it also that in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Tracy is supposed to be the daughter of a criminal. Well, Swann is the daughter of also another criminal. So it's like, okay, I see where you're going. And they really lean more into what was in the books with her being like, with On Her Majesty's Secret Service with Tracy is like, they're leaning into the idea that Madeleine's like, yeah, my dad is a Spectre bad guy, and he taught me how to do all these things, so I'm like cold to everybody else because I had a bad childhood thing, and I know that was in the books, and they don't really clarify that in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the movie, but like it's clear reference. It's just like, okay, I see where they're going with that.
Falling in love with the daughter of a criminal who isn't such a bad guy.
Right.
You grew a conscience.
Our game is our game. But this, women, children.
So then after that, Madeleine is kidnapped and Bond has to save her. It's a tad bit reckless. Bond's trying to rescue Madeleine, but he could just have easily have killed her. You know, it's like a tad bit reckless, but whatever. What are you going to do?
But even that scene doesn't make sense because it's like, all right, well, the logic here is that Mr. Hinx knows, right? Because he's seen the surveillance, which is part of the themes of the movie. He's seen the surveillance footage. He's already seen the conversation. He knows what Bond's after. Bond's after the l'Americain. He doesn't know what it is. He's after that. And the only person who knows what it is Madeleine Swann. Great. And the only reason Mr. Hinx needs to find this, not to catch Bond, but to stop Bond from ruining their plans. So would it not make more sense to just shoot her right then and there instead of kidnap her? I don't know.
Yeah, what was he going to do with her?
But this movie wants Blofeld to chew these scenes. So it's like, well, we got to bring her to Blofeld.
You'd think that there would have been a whole sequence of Hinx trying to kill her, and she runs away, and she puts on some skis, and she starts skiing down that mountain, and Bond chases after it. They're trying to kill her, but Bond's after them on skis instead of the plane.
Man, we could have wrote a better movie.
That actually would have been pretty great because at that point, you're right. Why didn't they just shoot her on the spot?
Because that's their motivation at that point. It's like they just have to stop Bond. But no, the movie doesn't want that to happen because the movie's like, well, we have to have the scene with Blofeld and Madeleine Swann. And it's like, unless Blofeld is like, no, I need you to bring Madeleine Swann in as well.
I'm in love with her.
You were just a girl when I saw you first. I came to your home once to see your father.
I don't remember that.
But I do.
He rescues Madeleine. They end up at l'Americain, which is a place and not a person.
I still think, and again, here's the thing. I know I said the midpoint is where it starts to go down here hill.
Yeah.
I do like this, the calmness and like them because again, one of my critiques I've always said about GoldenEye, even though it's it's our top list, we all agree on that, is that it just seems really strange that Natasha is just really quick to jump his bones. Natasha, what a Romana. Natasha,
Fyodorowna Semyonova.
So she's really quick to jump Bond's bones right at that moment when they're right off the train.
Hell yeah.
And I always find that scene to be a little odd. Like, it's like,
I
guess I can kind of buy it.
They kiss. They don't
sure.
right there
but
on
then,
the train
But this
tracks.
movie does kind of like, yeah, they're not going to fall in love right away because she's already sees through his tricks and she's like tearing down all his advances.
But then she does.
Slowly,
no, we'll
surely.
get to that. We'll get to why you're wrong. We'll get to why you're
We'll
right.
get to why
you're right for
I'm
now.
wrong.
You'll be wrong in a few minutes. Anyway, so I do love, it is goofy. It's definitively goofy and self-aware. Like I already mentioned, as franchises go on, they get goofy and self-aware.
You just killed James Bond.
I do love Who Sent You?
Who sent you? Who are you working for?
A genre joke.
That's so funny.
That's a really, really good joke, but it is goofy and self-aware. It's what I've been saying, like, you just killed James Bond. Like, it's just as goofy and self-aware, but I do think it's really funny. I do like it. Suddenly Madeleine, she has a moment where she's like, oh my God, Daddy did love me. Dad had all these photos of me in his
I've seen
office.
that in other movies too.
loved
That's
me.
what's funny is like I've seen recently it was like Ghostbusters Afterlife. They have that
Oh my
exact
God,
same
he
cliche.
did care. He did care for me.
Egon cared. He actually did. He had all these pictures of me in his
But
basement.
here's what's stupid. Is that right after that, Bond's like, okay, your job in this script is done. He's like, you don't need to come with me. She's like, I know.
But I want to understand what happened to my father.
That's the only justification for why she comes with. And it's like, what do you not understand? Your dad was part of this thing, and then he grew a conscience, and now he's dead. That is a terrible justification and a sloppy, singular line to justify why she's coming along with. I want to understand what happened to my father. What happened to your dad?
Now I understand why my father lost his mind.
Everybody already knows. The audience already knows. She should be
So
able
why
to
do we
assume what
care?
happened.
Right.
Why does she go with? And like if you couple that with the end of the movie where she suddenly shows up at the soon to be exploded MI6, you can kind of see the seams of the original script where like maybe originally she didn't go with Bond to Blofeld's compound. Maybe Bond went by himself and then later she showed up at the soon to be exploded MI6. You know what I'm saying? It's like they had all these horrible drafts and they combined them and everything got messy and then they were like, just need to go in production before we're done with the script. Like that's this whole movie. So she should never have gone with him to Blofeld's compound and should have just shown up at the end. She should have just like been tied up ready to die at the end of the film. But instead they decided to have her go with him. So the train sequence begins.
Because they have to go to Morocco. They have to go. They're like, they look at the map and they're like, okay, we know it's here and it's in the middle of nowhere. How do we get there? We have to take this train. It's the only major transportation we could take. There's no plane. There's nothing else.
No plane, no train.
Which doesn't also make sense. Why didn't they take a plane? But whatever.
They took a train because pastiche of other Bond movies that are better than this movie, right?
Why, given every other possible option, does a man choose the life of a paid assassin?
Why be an assassin? Why be a spy? And he says,
I'm not sure I ever had a choice.
Which conflicts, as many things do, conflicts with the last movie.
This is what you made us. I made my own choices. You think you did?
Silva's like, you think you made your own choices, but really M manipulated you. And Bond says, I made my own choices. Now suddenly he says, I don't think I ever had a choice but to become a spy and all that. So like those conflict. I don't think Bond learned from Silva that he never had a choice in the first place or whatever.
What would happen if you did?
Stop.
Yes.
I don't know.
But this dinner scene that they randomly have on the train, I think it is meant to echo his dinner with Vesper.
Just because you've done something doesn't mean you have to keep doing it.
Where she questions his career. It's the same thing. She's like, why be a killer? And Madeleine here is like, why keep doing this? Why be a spy? But the difference is Vesper was always pushing Bond off, whereas Madeleine up until now has been pushing Bond off. But suddenly, for no reason, she shows up and she's looking really hot. Her resting bitch face goes away. Like all of a sudden, she's leaning in and she's like this. She's all about Bond.
That's what you're saying that I was wrong about, right? Because you were saying earlier I was wrong. Because I mean, like the L'American stuff, it's like there's maybe a hint of her being a little flirtatious.
Come anywhere near me, and I'll kill you.
But it's not like, again, because of her style, she's very stonewally.
Yeah.
Bitch face, as you like to put it. And,
resting bitch face.
Resting
extreme.
bitch face.
Yeah.
And it's like, and you got a definitely actress who could be a little more playful, but still be standoffish.
Yeah.
You could play those, like, do that back and forth. Maybe you could have pulled that off. Maybe you can pull the train scene.
She
off
is
more.
pushing Bond away. and then comes up with a BS reason to follow him, this vague thing about I need to figure out what happened to my father, even though there's no mystery there. And then she just suddenly decides, like she brought a dress with her, I guess, and a bunch of makeup to look hot for Bond. Whereas, remember when Vesper did it, it was because the two of them were undercover together. They were stuck together. So Bond says to her,
I need you looking fabulous, so that when you walk up behind me and kiss me on the neck, the players across from me will be thinking about your neckline and not about their cards. Do you think you can do that for me?
I'll do my best.
So she's like, well, f*** you, Bond. And she gets real hot. And she walks out and she's so hot that instead she distracts Bond. That's what's so great about that moment, is that she got so hot that even Bond was like, wait, whose turn is it? Whereas with this, she just walks out looking hot out of nowhere. And there's like this beautiful music playing and Bond's like, oh my God, you shouldn't look this cute. It's so forced. It's so forced and ridiculous.
Right. And I think something like that may have worked better in the 60s, and only because it was like of the time, if you were going traveling, you would always look your best.
It would have worked in From Russia with Love, because she wanted Bond to fall in love with her, because she was in love with Bond. But she went from hating Bond to suddenly she's like, look at me.
Sure. My point about it, though, is I'm saying that's like, even within universe, if they're trying to look nice, it just seemed odd, because it's like you're going to Morocco and you just left the American and like you're on the run. I just don't. But then again, I could make that about Bond, saying like, well, why does he always have nice clothes? But whatever. But I mean, you do have a point.
My point being that in Casino Royale, he was challenging her to put on some makeup and put on a dress and look hot, and she was like, F you, dude, I'm gonna do just that, and I'm gonna do it so hard that even you are gonna fall for me.
Why is she looking this way, and why is she making all these subtly advancing towards him when prior she had no interest in him? I get what you're saying.
So then, of course, Mr. Hinx attacks. Whatever, they have their fight. It's fine. But the moment for me where I'm just like, what? Is that they do the goofy, self-aware-esque thing of they have the whole fight scene and Bond wraps the rope around his neck, and then he manages to hook the keg, and then all the kegs fall off, and then the last keg gets pulled off, and that drags off Mr. Hinx as well. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But he looks up at Bond and just says, he gets pulled off. And the rope is wrapped around his neck in a way that in the time it took for him to look up and say goofily, and then get pulled off, in that same amount of time, he could have just pulled the rope off. It's many things at once. It's goofy. It's out of place. It shows that he's not mute. He just chooses not to speak, which is kind of dumb. I mean, yes, it's Jaws-esque.
Well, here's to us.
With Jaws, he didn't need to, because he was basically like Frankenstein's monster. A guy like that, it's like, why does he choose not to speak?
Continue to speak!
Is he just too cool for school? Or is he just trying to emulate better characters that pre-existed him by decades? Blah, blah,
blah. But
blah.
That's what most of this movie is. It's like taking the prior stuff, not understanding how that stuff worked, and then just making a reference to it.
It's just another goofy, stupid moment to have him say where if you, and I'll do it right now, if you edit out that moment, it's just a better, classier moment. And then it leads into what we said before about how adrenaline makes you horny. It increases the affections between them. Okay, cool. I'm okay with the way the train sequence ends. But then we get to the crater sequence. So, what was their plan after getting off the train? They're just going to sit there and wait for somebody to pick them up. I guess coincidentally, somebody picks them up. The arrival to the crater is very Bond-esque, and I like that. It's very classy and polite.
It's Dr.
Right?
It is 100% Dr. No.
Your host invites you both to rest, relax, and join him for drinks at 4.
Tell our host we won't be late.
He'll be delighted if you'll join him for dinner. Shall I say you'll be there?
Tell him I also will be delighted.
Exactly. It's just like Dr. No or any other good bad guy where they treat Bond as an honored guest. Again, Bond movies are always classy like that. That's what makes them Bond movies. Then when they go in for the meteor,
I think we're meant to be impressed.
Bond says, I think we're meant to be impressed. Yeah, exactly. It's bullshit. We, the audience, are meant to be impressed, but the whole meteor scene is BS, and it's only the beginning of the bullshit. Again, trying to justify why this is happening in the first place the whole time.
So many years up there, alone, silent, building momentum until it chose to make its mark on Earth. A huge, unstoppable force.
Admittedly, it's a very good metaphor, but that doesn't mean that I believe it. And again, not giving us a good story, but giving us justification for why they made the movie in the first place, which is not a recipe for anything good.
The Kartenhof, the oldest in human possession.
And speaking of the meteorite, the first time I saw the rhyodite on the toxicology reports, I thought it meant that the Spectre rings were made out of material from the meteorite itself, which obviously would have made the rings really special and unique, but whatever. Blofeld goes on to take credit for every movie that came before, which hardly makes any sense and undermines all those movies, unfortunately.
You came across me so many times, and yet you never saw me. Le Chiffre, Green, Silver.
All dead.
That's right. A nice pattern developed. You interfered in my world. I destroyed yours.
Again, for example, Silva was cooler when he was just a single guy doing his thing. Instead, retroactively, they're taking ownership for him, which cheapens Skyfall, right? It retroactively f***s with better movies, specifically because it all boils down to them being stepbrothers, which, again, is stupid. Blofeld started an international terrorism syndicate in order to get back at his foster brother. F*** you. Fast forward to the whole turn this off moment. Turn it off! That moment is way too over the top. And again, this kind of shows the sloppiness and unclearness of the script. This whole moment doesn't reveal anything, right? Follow me on this. If Bond had killed Mr. White in cold blood, then Bond wouldn't want Madeleine to see that. He'd be like, no, turn this off. Like if Blofeld showing that clip to Madeleine was revealing a truth or revealing something that Bond had said earlier to be a lie, then Bond would turn it off. Instead, it's like, why are you freaking out, Bond?
The only thing I could see is that he knows what's going to happen, and I don't know.
Her father's going to commit suicide.
To be human for 5 minutes, it's like, I wouldn't want to see a loved one shoot themselves that I loved.
Yeah,
I get that. But to your point, I do agree. I do feel like it doesn't make, it's just like, or if he had killed him, like, yeah, you would been like, he would really be like,
you would freak out.
You would freak out. Yeah, that would really sever their connection.
That'd be a very Blofeld thing to do, is to sever their connection.
And I do wonder, maybe they reshot that, where that was like originally one thing, and then they went back and reshot it and just kept that scene in as is.
Yes. Then the drill scene. So we just keep upping the ante of dumb. I'm going to drill into your brain, and it's going to mess up all these mental faculties. Oh, never mind. None of them do anything. It's so dumb. It's infinitely worse than the shoulder injury stuff from Skyfall, The World's Not Enough, because like at least those, they stick around for a while and then they evaporate. With this, nothing happens.
He gets this happen, nothing happens. He doesn't.
Nothing happens.
Okay. Our rewrite of the movie, if we keep this scene in, right?
Yeah.
Instead of the whole thing exploding, if it was that, and then as they're trying to escape and they're, like he's having trouble focusing, shooting a gun or like something physically is like really hard for him to do certain things, like great, that's a great wound for him to have. Again, especially if it was like a two-parter movie, and this isn't the first part of the two-parter that happens or whatever, or three-parter. But, like, it's just kind of like, yeah, right, nothing happens.
And remember, they had just established that Madeleine knows how to operate firearms. So there was an opportunity here for her to do something with that during the escape. But instead, Bond kills everybody as if nothing had just happened.
You know what happens when a cuckoo hatches inside another bird's nest.
Yes. It forces the other eggs out.
Yes. Well, this cuckoo made me realize my father's life had to end.
We don't really ever hear exactly why he's so pissed at James. Again, flashbacks would have helped. Flashbacks would have shown some moment
as he was getting drilled.
As kids,
we see flashbacks.
Oh yeah, sure, that would have been cool.
We see these little moments, almost like a video game thing. We see all these little moments, and you're like, Bond with Hans Oppenheimer showing him, like, all right, kid, you know how to do this.
Yeah,
you
and
see him at Skyfall
Franz
shooting
is pissed off and bitter and all that.
We see him at Skyfall. We see him we see all these moments from the movies. We see Vesper Lent. Like, they could have done something like that.
Yeah. Again, seeing exactly why Bond chose the path of good and Blofeld the path of evil. Instead, we're just sitting there and Blofeld's like, he used to ski with my dad. And you're like, dude, no, this is not enough justification for becoming like the most evil guy on the planet. Instead, literally every piece of dialogue from the infamous Blofeld is designed to not tell us an interesting story by developing a character and possibly showing us something where we would sympathize with him, like what we had with Silva. But to justify him being in this film in the first place, which is stupid.
Right.
He says
The daughter of an assassin.
Madeleine is the daughter of an assassin, which since when is Mr. White an assassin? He's never killed anybody.
Well, I don't know if that's...
he killed Lashif.
He does kill Lashif.
He's not an assassin. He's like number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5.
I think it's the equivalent. Okay, just defending the movie very weakly here. I think it's the equivalent of people calling Bond an assassin, but you could also call Bond a spy. But
Bond
it's
is an assassin, though.
Definitively. But anytime you refer to James Bond, it's like he's supposed to be referred to as a spy, but within universe, and as we've added the license to kill Matra, it's like, yeah, he's an assassin. In the same context, I could see why he's saying he's an assassin. That's all I'm saying.
Anyway, so then she runs up to Bond and she's like, I love you. I would say that's a little too soon to say I love you. Instead, her being affectionate, trying to help him,
Yeah.
But, we're at this point, we're nitpicking. But then, why didn't, again, this is the 4th movie where apparently you have like Mr. Super Smart Blofeld, who even had, allegedly had Silva as an underling. Why wouldn't the incredible genius Blofeld take James Bond's watch, knowing where he comes from, knowing about Q Branch?
Little gadgets from those fools in Q Branch.
Instead, Blofeld does this thing where he like stupidly looks at the watch like, why are you throwing the watch at me? And then it blows up in his face. So it's like, okay, how is this guy the head of the organization? Silva should have killed him a long time ago.
Well, I mean, he should have known. He's got the surveillance. You would think he would have the surveillance of seeing Q Branch, so he would know.
You would think
the watch was the thing.
Yeah. So then we have the worst escape scene in any Bond movie ever, where even though Bond has had his balance and his vision and everything drilled out of his brain, apparently it like helped him. Apparently it turned him into a super soldier where he's able to kill 24 guys, even shooting a guy from like 500 yards away with no problem at all.
The first probe will play with your sight, your hearing, your balance.
Even though you just had all of that drilled out of your brain. F you. F you, movie. So then to top off this ridiculously contrived and sloppy sequence, Bond shoots a fuel line which in perfect video game fashion proceeds to blow up the entire facility about 1 minute after the watch detonated.
That was easy.
It's not over yet.
This moves us stupidly to the big, dumb, sloppy ending. We cut to the safe house, and I do, again, this movie, there are sporadic moments that I like when it's, hey, the safe house, how safe is it? And then M opens the door, there's Bond, he's like,
it's safe.
I like stuff like that, but that doesn't make me like the overall movie anymore.
No. I'm not arguing with you.
Here's what's stupid, though. They have their quick moment where Bond catches everybody up to what he's been doing, and then out of nowhere, Madeleine's like, bye.
I can't go back to this life, and I'm not going to ask you to change. This is who you are.
You're saying goodbye.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Madeleine's just
They're like, you know what? I don't need to be with you anymore. I'm going to leave for the plot. I got to leave. The writers want me to be in this building for some reason.
They could have done it where Bond went to Morocco on his own, and in the meantime, Blofeld managed to have her kidnapped. That would have been more believable than all of a sudden she's like, I think I want to leave now. And the moment she leaves, she gets kidnapped. As opposed to what happened like 30 seconds later. Bond gets kidnapped and he gets taken to where he was basically headed anyway. They were headed to CNS, but CNS and MI6 are literally a bridge away from each other. So they take Bond to where he was headed to anyway. They might as well have just set it up so that Bond and Madeleine were in the same car with Mallory, and both of them were taken. And when they got to MI6, Bond went this way to go see Blofeld, and Madeleine went this way to go get tied into a chair. That would have been fine. Anything. Literally anything would have been better than her being like,
then just like, I gotta go.
I gotta leave.
I gotta leave.
Why?
I can't be a part of this anymore. Bye.
Yeah. Ugh. That is one of the most sloppiest things. I think in Bond history, that is the sloppiest moment ever.
It is an example of like, we want this thing to happen.
Yeah.
But then they're like, well, how do we get there? I don't know. We'll figure it out later. And then they never figured it out. So they're like, whatever they had left, they're like, okay, cool.
Yeah. So then, Mallory goes to see C with Q. Obviously, C didn't watch Casino Royale. Never assume that your desk gun has bullets in it if someone ambushes you from the shadows.
And now we know what C stands for.
Cunt.
Blofeld should have had a fucking bandage on his face. Him just having that scar out, that not a scar, just having this gash in his face is so dumb. Bond's like, ow, that must hurt. It's like, yeah, that must hurt. You would have a bandage on your face. It's so laughable.
Nah, it says cooler that way, man. So cooler that way. No, you're right. Charlie, if this movie was a two-parter...
Yeah, I already know what you're going to say, because it's exactly the way it should have been. He should have had a bandage on here, and then in part 2, then he's got the massive scar that we all know about from Yolt. I'm working my way up to that rant, that this movie should have been a two-parter, where Blofeld got away.
Or a trilogy, or whatever,
yeah,
you know?
Blofeld should have gotten away. Definitively, he should have gotten away. Even if this was the last Daniel Craig movie ever made, Blofeld should still have gotten away, because that's what's
I'll drink
next.
to that.
Shooting down Blofeld, cheers to that. Shooting down Blofeld is dumb. It is dumb. I mean, if you're in a helicopter, the moment you're being shot at, they would have just veered off. But they don't. They just stay the course so that Bond can easily wrap up these 4 movies in a tight bow. There's nothing about that tying it up in a nice bow that completes the story.
Finish it.
It just takes Blofeld, who's supposed to be the biggest baddie ever, and makes him look completely inept. He looks more inept than Silva ever did, than Green ever did, or Lashif ever did.
Or any of the other Blofelds that we've seen in the movies.
He's made to look even dumber than Largo. Him just having his stupid helicopter shot down and not getting away makes him the worst bad guy of all time. He's supposed to be the biggest, right? The expectation is he's like the biggest baddie of all time, but he is lower than dirt the moment he allows this to happen. The biggest baddie of all just gets shot down by not Bond's other gun, but by his Walther PPK, because it's super special. Do you know what I'm talking about? He's shooting, he puts away that gun, he pulls out a Walther PPK, and that's what takes down Blofeld's helicopter. Which again, for the millionth time, I feel like my intelligence is being assaulted and insulted. And it's because, Bond fans are supposed to just go, oh, he pulled out a Walther PPK. Oh my God. But instead, I'm just like, no, that's stupid. What you did with it is stupid. I hate you now. I hate you. Blofeld being taken down by that is like, okay, he's not the biggest baddie. Silva's better than him. Green is better than him. Lashif is better than literally Mr. White. Everybody is better than him. He's like this stupid asshole who's so caught up in getting revenge against his brother, I guess.
Well, that's brothers for you. They always know which buttons to press.
Yeah, better movie. He would have escaped, because then they could do the next movie. And if he had gotten away with some evil plan and gotten away, then I'm like, oh, it's like talking about the Ant-Man Quantumania movie that we did.
No, dude, Infinity War. If only Infinity War had come out sooner, then the Bond producers would have chased that trend and said, oh, let's let the bad guy win and then come back for a big finale. Honestly, CNS should have come online. C is killed, but CNS comes online and Blofeld heads it up. So now Blofeld, the biggest baddie, now has the greatest intelligence apparatus ever conceived, And now, come movie 5, Daniel Craig Bond is on the run. He can never show his face on any camera ever. He is hunted globally. Imagine James Bond defeating that. That is a near impossible task.
Great. You set it up for like, now I feel like Blofeld has earned his spot at least. If you take out the brother stuff, as being this amazing, great bad guy that you wanted to set up.
It would have been a bad guy plot worthy of Blofeld and Spectre. Instead, Bond just shoots him down with one bullet, and Blofeld is a big dumbass. The ending of this movie is so bad that it even bested Film Hacker.
Hold on, stop. We have never mentioned Film Hacker. Maybe you should explain who Film Hacker is. Like, it's kind of a whole thing with our channel.
Right, okay, sorry. If you go to our channel page and you go to the subscriptions shelf, you'll see an icon for Film Hacker. Film Hacker is an AI construct I developed with the Russians way back for the purpose of repairing American films that are too terrible to allow to exist. If you go to that channel, there are a series of explainer videos regarding fan edits that Film Hacker has made for everything from Pearl Harbor and Dunkirk to The Hobbit and the Matrix sequels. And if you look in the description of those videos, you can actually watch these edits that he has made, these full-length feature edits. But the last cut that it was working on years ago, back when we started Ranked, was a Daniel Craig James Bond supercut, but it was never finished. And do you want to know why, McCurdy?
I have my guesses, but why don't you tell me why?
Because the ending of this movie is so fucking terrible that even an AI construct couldn't figure out how to fix it, okay? That's how fucking bad it is. The movie couldn't be saved, but I don't know. I mean, now that No Time to Die exists and that there's an entire new 2.5 hours to work with, maybe now Film Hacker will be able to finish it. But frankly, nobody's heard from Film Hacker since, back when Ranked began. So, so I'm told.
Do you think he's coming back?
I don't know. Okay. Well, that explains that.
Finish it.
I think the end of the movie sucks, right? I think,
sucks.
But I do like, here's the thing. The only thing I like about the ending, I don't like the ending, but that's the only thing I like. Okay, I see what you're doing, Mendez, and I somewhat give you a tiny applause for it, is that they do slowly try to build up some themes that they've had in the past with Honor Majesty's Secret Service and in this movie and they mention it early on. She's like having this conversation of like, why don't you just leave all this behind and not be a spy instead and just live your life, right? And that's always been a theme in all these other movies. And I do like that contradiction of like, I want to do this, but there's living versus this is only going to bring me death, or this, life, whatever. But I do like that at least they play with the idea with the London bridges. She's on one side of the bridge, M's on the other side of the bridge, and he has to choose which side he's going to go, and then he goes to... I don't like the ending because, again, it's like, well, I don't think you earned that, like, Madeleine. Like, I don't think you're not Bond's, like, there's just, you're not the best written character. I don't believe you. I can't buy you. So that whole thing just feels like meh, meh, meh. And then on top of that, Blofeld, I would rather him escape and Bond have failed.
Honestly, I would have a different feeling about the movie overall if they allowed Blofeld to get away. But taking the biggest baddie of all time and turning him into a fucking retard is a ticket straight to the bottom of the list. It's embarrassing.
I agree. I agree. But I do think, like, again, going back to my issues with the movie, one is being, and this is all about the end of the movie. One, I don't think the stakes are high enough, or it's not specific and tangible enough to be like, why do I care? Why do I care? You've given me no reason to give a shit about.
Oh no, they have access to intelligence.
Okay, yes, I get what you're saying as far as like in the real world, yes, that is a problem. If any governments had all of the eyes, in which I guess our government does anyway, they're probably watching this right now, and they just saving it on a hard drive someplace.
Putting us on a list.
But even then, it's like, okay, but there's no malice there other than like, what are you going to do with that? Like, we're not, if the movie gives that example, much like the thing that I said with the Living Daylights back then, where it was like, the movie doesn't have the time to stop for us to care about the Afghanis that are being murdered by the Russians. Like, why do I care? I don't care. There's no scene to tell me I should care, so why should I care? And I'm like, okay, back to the stakes of this movie. it's not like, oh no, they get the surveillance thing. Okay, what's going to happen next? Are they going to access the nuclear codes? Is there going to be an outbreak of a chemical weapon? Is the world economy going to crash because now they have controlled all these computers? No.
If anything, you're like, maybe C's right.
Take a look at the world. Chaos. Because people like you, paper pushers and politicians, are too spineless to do what needs to be done. So I made an alliance to put the power where it should be, and now you want to throw it away for the sake of democracy. Whatever the hell that is.
Maybe we should give up our freedom for security.
There's nothing there for me
There's
to
no
be like,
counter
I need
argument
to
to
care.
see, to the point where I'm just like...
It's just more on a moral it's literally, let's place the movie down onto a moral standpoint of like privacy and security. And you're like, okay. But like, I just don't feel the urgency. There's no urgency in that. Just on the C and C stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, just that aspect of the movie. The twist that C has been a part of this the whole time is just so like, oh yeah, he was one of my guys. You're like, okay.
I'm guessing our little friend C, he's one of your disciples.
You could say that.
What does he get out of it?
Nothing. He's a visionary like me.
But then again, like we already see that they can watch MI6, so it's like, do we need Nine Eyes? It's a countdown for what? The countdown just seems arbitrary because the writers were like, oh, we need a countdown to make the stakes seem higher than they really are. That's what it felt like.
Meanwhile, Skyfall and Spectre are exploring similar themes. Once again, it's like...
Read a dossier last year on how the 00 program was obsolete, how drones could do all our dirty work abroad.
Bond is irrelevant, and drones will do it, and you're a dinosaur, and information, and you don't need boots on the ground. Same shit we just did in Skyfall. Again, it would have been better if C would have been that woman I pointed out earlier. But Skyfall was contrived at parts that are easily forgiven for the sake of its themes, but this crap is unforgivable as it lends to no themes at all and the dumbest, most useless Blofeld we've ever met. This is the worst one. At least every beat of Skyfall serves an end goal for Silva, where this movie just feels so weak and random and scattered and pointless. Skyfall and Spectre feel like someone cut them in half. Like take the idealized form of Skyfall and the idealized form of Spectre, cut them in half and like transplant them over on top of each other. Spectre's story should have been first, with themes of the digital world taking over, losing the list and defunding the 00 program, and Skyfall second regarding Bond's backstory in relation to Blofeld. Instead, it's like they're the same movie, but messy. Like, I keep hesitating on including it now, or like when we talk about No Time to Die, about how ideally they would have been laid out, but they're like the same movie, again, repeated, but without the Silva stuff.
The Nine Eyes program, all that stuff, I don't think is inherently bad, but it is what exactly, like, that's a more specific, very direct, what they're talking about in Skyfall shows up in this movie. So it's like this thing had showed up in Skyfall, and then Silva got a hold of it. I don't know. There's definitely like, I see what you're talking about as far as there's like a weird connection. Practically speaking, I think it was like let's continue that idea that we were talking about in the last movie, and like, because this is going to be a continuation of Spectre. This isn't going to be a later story. We're continuing that story from Skyfall. Sorry, but it reads more like, let's rewrite Skyfall. Like let's do Skyfall again, and it almost feels that way because it's like, okay, we're gonna do tradition, boots on the ground versus computers and drones and all that stuff. And we're going to do the brothers plot where we have one guy who's good guy, was James Bond, and we have the bad guy who's the anti-James Bond.
Yep.
But now they're brothers to make it even more, but then it's stupid. Then it gets stupid. But it feels like they're rewriting Skyfall.
Members' comments. Last time we did everybody's call sign because YouTube changed and everybody's call signs are very different from their real names. So the Surgestit, aka the Entertainer, the worst one, primarily because of poor writing. While Blofeld has his moments, it does not feel justified to tie him to the previous films, nor does it feel justified that he is Bond's stepbrother. Does anyone actually buy that he is the author of all of Bond's pain?
Me. It was all me, James. It's always been me, the author of all your pain.
No, of course not. The film also tries to address mass surveillance, but only in a superficial way. It's a shame since it's definitely relevant and would have been a smart focus for the story, since Spectre is all about control, of course. Instead, it's even more dumbed down than fake news and Tomorrow Never Dies. It primarily suffers due to the focus on making the story personal for Bond. Yes, the same with Bond and Madeleine. They barely have time to meet before apparently falling in love. During the torture scene, it's hard to believe that Madeleine is supposed to care so much for Bond. So why should we? Yes. Dude, the entertainer's always on point. Due to Bond's personal stakes being so unengaging, the climax feels completely off. Craig's rogues gallery appearing on the walls at the MI6 demolition site is supposed to make you feel like it's all been leading up to this, but it really hasn't. It makes no sense. On this note, it annoys me that they toned down Green and Quantum of Solace because people generally dislike the film. Exactly. It's like they're like, let's react in the short term. Nobody liked that movie.
When you look at the films, it's like it would make way more sense, regardless of like anything I've said, because I do think that movie is kind of forgettable. But regardless, it would make the most sense to be him connected to Spectre than anybody else. He would have been an agent of Spectre. That would have made more sense.
Yeah, like be confident in your franchise enough to be like, I know you guys don't like Quantum now, because in the future, I think people will like Quantum more in the future. I really think they will. So like, treat it like it wasn't this weird up that nobody likes. Treat it like someday people are going to come around to it. Same with Bond saving Madeleine. Compared to when Bond was trying to save Vesper, it's embarrassing that this is supposed to have the same impact. Yeah, romantically, who cares? But that net stunt is definitely one of the best moments of this movie. Of course, there are also good moments. It's still a Bond film, and I enjoy it. I don't relate. I hate this movie. The Bellucci sequence is probably a top 10 for me. Also great cinematography throughout and a classic feel to the film and the score. Number 25 feels harsh. There sure are less competent Bond films, such as Die Another Day and Diamonds Are Forever, but this is the only film where I lose all interest in the story. Cordy Manor. See, Cordy Manor's got it going on. Cordy Manor's call sign is Cordy Manor. And his YouTube name is Cordy Manor, so smart.
Keep it consistent.
Spectre is the worst Bond movie ever and is also the most boring movie ever. Spectre meeting, boring. It's not suspenseful at all. It's just boring. Bond, boring. Madeleine Swann, boring. Car chase, boring. Plot, boring. People like to say that this movie is like Die Another Day. The first two acts are good and the third is a train wreck, but I disagree. Nothing about the first two acts is good. What about it is good? The cold open was cool the first time, but now I think it's way too ridiculous. All that for a ring. Bringing back Judi Dench in some stupid video. Why is there smart blood? The Monica Bellucci scene is way too creepy for Craig Bond. Bond in this movie comes off like a complete psychopath. The rat scene is ridiculous. Finding tapes of Vesper's torture is kind of dumb. Madeleine Swann trying way too hard to get. She's playing hard to get. They just let Bond into the meeting and he doesn't find it odd. The rings were stupid in 1965 and even more stupider in 2015. Yeah.
Yeah, because we always made that joke about like the fact that he's got the Spectre ring and Thunderball and it's like ginormous.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I'm a part of a secret organization? Oh, really?
Not so secret. Yeah, quantum pins are dumber, but yes. The meeting wasn't even suspenseful. The whole time I was like, someone talk. It leads into a boring-ass car chase with the most annoying Bond comedy when he turns on the radio. Exactly, it gets goofy. The scene with Mr. White is a good scene, but I don't get why he's in exile. Bond ignoring them. Well, isn't it because he's like being hunted? Like he's essentially being hunted.
Well, a thallium would suggest that he doesn't like you very much anymore. And clearly the feeling is mutual.
Here's the thing. I like the Spectre scene. I like the moodiness of it. It does kind of give me the vibes of Eyes Wide Shut. The feel of that, where it's kind of the same kind of sequence, right? Because he's like, Tom Cruise is going into this meeting. He's like breaking into this weird sex cult meeting. The things that it's missing really, for me, as a Bond fan, really, is like it's missing the classic Spectre kill that we've talked about, where you think it's going to be this guy gets killed. Never mind, it's this guy. It's actually his partner.
They just gave that over to Mr. Hijinks, and that's supposed to replace it, but it's not the same. It doesn't show that ruthlessness of Blofeld himself.
I don't need the comic book stuff of like the burning chairs or the buttons under it, but like it would have been nice if like you thought he was going to kill somebody else, and then
showing somebody be like, but Mr. Blofeld, and he's like,
we didn't get that.
You failed me.
It's
that
the
would
one
have been
thing
nice.
that we're missing. I would have thought it would have been a cool element if Bond came in and then like they all like eventually when they all knew that he was there, everybody turned and saw him and like they already knew he was coming. I thought it would have been cool.
Because it is creepy, but yeah. So anyway, Bond ignoring the camera is either dumb or makes him look like a psycho. Is he talking about when he's meeting
Mr. White?
Mr. White? Bond ignoring the camera?
Remember when he goes to Mr. White and then later Batista comes in and he walks in and he's like, oh, I missed him. And then he looks up and there's a camera there. And you're like, you would think that Bond would have been smart and got rid of the camera or something, but he doesn't.
Yeah, but
do that.
saying Bond ignoring the camera, it makes him look like a psycho. So like, Cordy, you're saying Bond should have covered his tracks better? Either way, it's sloppy. I mean, just like, again, sloppy piece of shit. The Hinx fight on the train is not even that good. I thought he was going to survive that like it was a Bugs Bunny cartoon and come back at the end. Yeah, I wrote that in my notes. I failed to mention it. It's like, did he die? I guess he did because he never comes back. But like, he probably could have survived.
He could have because there's been other times when like a character like Jaws has gone through something similar and then he just ends up coming back.
Yeah, the fact that Bond is barely bloody or sweating is too neat. It leads to Swann and Bond having forced sex. Well, I don't know. Again, adrenaline makes people horny.
What do we do now?
However, I will say that her line is really dumb if you think about it for more than 2 seconds. What could Bond have possibly responded to that otherwise?
What do we do now?
We're gonna her what?
So it's just a poor setup. It's just more sloppy screenwriting. Why is Hinx even trying to kill them if Blofeld is going to meet them later anyways? I thought about that. I think he's trying to impress Blofeld. Anybody would have done that.
I know you said his character's flat, but it does seem like he is like this. He's a ladder climber. Like that's what I get out of it. Is just like, oh yeah, he's trying to prove himself in the organization. And like, yeah, again, that would have been cooler if we got a better car chase where maybe there was multiple cars and like you suggest, like he's ramming the other cars to get to Bond because he wants the credit and everything. Again, because it's sloppy, it goes. And what I suggested earlier is like, why don't you just kill Swann?
Yeah.
Right? Like, why wouldn't he just do that? Like, wouldn't that be
It's all
more
sloppy
efficient?
and stupid and not thought out. So
It's dumb.
I have a hot take with Blofeld. I never thought Blofeld was a good villain for Bond. He was never good in the series at all. The smartest thing Broccoli did was kill him off and for your eyes only. So the fact he was brought back was a dumb decision. Yeah, and rushed. If you're going to do it, wait a few years. Hinx should actually be Blofeld. Blofeld in the books was supposed to be a big wrestler, not some skinny white dude with a scar on his face. Perfect for Dave Bautista. Now we come to the third act of the movie. The third act of this movie is the worst third act in the history of movies. Yes, really. I was about to say yes, really. Yes, parentheses. Yes, really. I mean, this act is so bad, it makes the third act of Die Another Day look like the best movie ever. I was going to go into the third act, but it makes me angry to think about, and I'm sure Charlie will break it down. In short, this movie tries to be a 60s Bond movie and a modern Bond and fails at both, and I hate it. Bottom of the list. Justice for You Only Live Twice. Well, at least we know what C stands for. Crap. Yes. Cordy. Yes. Oh, and then Prox TD, who is Lemmy is God, says, this is fucking hilarious. Lemmy is God says, there is so much wasted potential in this movie. Tons of classic Bond stuff, great locations, great actors for major roles. Walt, Sido, Bellucci, who is criminally underused, yes. That should all add up to at least a movie like Thunderball, but it does not even come close. Every so often, I forget this and end up rewatching it, thinking it is at least an entertaining action movie that is fun to watch. The pre-title sequence is pretty cool, except the quote, yeah. And then the movie mostly gets progressively worse from there. Once the movie gets to the Blofeld brother turn, and purports to rewrite the whole Craig era, I just want to turn it off. This is easily bottom 5, certainly Craig's worst, and a contender for dead last due to the collateral damage to the other Craig-era films. Exactly. It retroactively f***s with better movies, just like Quantum f***ed with Casino. But this is even worse.
Yeah, we forgot to mention the opening. And I was like, yeah, I forgot about that. It's like so weird because it's never been established on any of these films where they have an artsy opening. The only other thing that they ever do is we're here. That's it. That's all they ever do. It's like, hey, we're in Mexico. We're in Venice, whatever. But they've never been like the dead are alive. And they're like, Mendez, this is your thesis. This is what you're opening with.
Yeah. This is the theme.
Stupid.
Oh, you thought Blofeld was dead. Well, yeah, we thought that Silva was dead. Again, you're just trying to recreate the same success you just had, and you're failing at it miserably.
Right.
Spectre Chair Engineer says, Spectre is one of the most frustrating Bond films for me. On the surface, it has just about every classic Bond element you can think of. However, it's obvious that no one in the writer's room had a clue of how to tie it all together. My biggest complaint is the presence of weird continuity errors, like Q's gag about the car, exactly, that directly contradict Skyfall. Kind of strange when the point is to connect the Craig films. Recycled score drains the life from this movie. First time the series goes into straight-up sacrilegious territory, too. Low-tier Bond, arguably bottom 3. CMJM1221, a.k.a. TOF, Toph says, here are my primary thoughts on Spectre. This one is quite low on the list for me. I'm sure the plot, story, and character issues have already been discussed, Bond nauseum. The retconning, the erratic tone, the complete shelving of the universal surveillance threat, the sisterhood of the traveling Spectre ring, and the sisterhood of the traveling Spectre ring, and the brilliant idea to make our megalomaniacal arch nemesis motivated by the Cinderella effect. After some thought, this is what this movie feels like to me. Sludge. That feeling of being force-fed, factory-produced baby food on a full stomach that watching Marvel and Star Wars content feels like now. If Barbara Broccoli ever sold the Bond movies to Disney, I imagine that Spectre would be the kind of movie they would produce after 5 years. What rescues this movie from the bottom is the scene in the secret room at L'Americaine. Bond happening upon Vesper's interrogation tape and discarding it swiftly is an effective and subtle character moment because we can interpret it in several ways. Has he moved on from Vesper, or has he merely compartmentalized her? Still 23 out of 25 for me. I'm curious what you would put below. What the goes below this? A note on Blofeld. I place myself in the old Patterson camp. Oh, Patterson camp, where he is at his best when he is hidden. However, this doesn't mean we can't learn anything about him. I recall the scene in From Russia with Love where he compares the world powers to the Siamese fighting fish who exhaust themselves before being beaten by a third, which effectively encapsulates our villain's worldview. The global powers are fools who deserve to be subverted and devoured. I've always enjoyed the more philosophical Bond villains, one who has given thought to their actions. Of course. My hot take is I don't think a character like Blofeld should ever leave the shadows. Not every villain needs to be made flesh and blood. And as this movie proves, giving a Bond villain more personal motivation doesn't always make them more interesting and dimensional. Sometimes it serves only to expose them of being motivated by base human jealousy rather than heavier concepts like power, chaos, or domination. 100%. Even if you insisted on having them be brothers, okay, just do that and then move straight to dialogue scenes about, like, everything that Blofeld should have been saying. They gave it to C, where C's like, look, the world is chaos, and I'm trying to bring order to the chaos. That's at least something that everybody can understand, because the world is chaotic, and you have all these men trying to usher in a certain amount of control and therefore order around this chaos.
Like he would be like very Machiavellian and just be like, it doesn't matter. I'm going to kill billions of people because I need to do this if that'll bring order. And Bond's like, you're killing people.
There have been men throughout history who have tried to do that. And it is a classic story of freedom versus security. I love any story about freedom versus security. The question always becomes, once you introduce that system of control, who's in charge? Who gets to make those decisions?
We're a global power.
An unelected one.
And human nature proves time and again that inevitably that leads to tyranny. Now, Blofeld may have good intentions, but it will lead to global tyranny. And there are some people who want that. Cut to Loki, where Loki's like, you human beings, you just want to be ruled.
Is this not your natural state? It's the unspoken truth of humanity that you crave subjugation.
That is true. There are a lot of Americans who probably shouldn't live in America because they really just want to live somewhere where somebody tells them what to do all day. They just want Big Brother to look after them because they can't look after themselves. They want to be sheep because freedom can be scary because it's uncertain. But America is specifically chaotic because we decided a long time ago that we'd rather have the chaos that comes with freedom rather than the tyranny that comes with security.
You've turned every cell phone in Gotham into a microphone. This is wrong.
I've got to find this man, Lucius.
At what cost?
For example, we'd rather have the chaos of the occasional mass shooting than the inevitable tyranny of a government that subjugates an unarmed populace. We would rather deal with the discomfort of an individual's right to say offensive things rather than allow hate speech laws to silence those who speak truth to power. Because again, it always leads to Spectre-esque total control.
United States of America, I have freedom of speech. If people don't like it, then go f*** their f***ing self.
Now those freedoms have been infringed upon for, the last 150 years as our Constitution has slowly been ripped to shreds. But the point I'm making is that it's an eternally interesting concept of freedom versus security, specifically because there's an inverse relationship between the two. As freedom goes up, security goes down, and vice versa.
I know surveillance is a fact of life. It's how you use the information that concerns me and who is using it.
This is what we need to do to keep the people safe.
So there is no easy and perfect answer, which makes for great thematic storytelling. And so this movie could have been about that. And all the interesting stuff that Blofeld should have said was given over to C to deliver in like a minute and a half, rather than make the whole movie about that. Because as we've talked about with all these different Bond movies, the most interesting bad guys are the ones where you're like, I can see their point. A certain part of me says, yeah, C is right. Democracy is bullshit. It is bullshit most of the time.
The people shall have the right to vote. Even the stupid ones? Yes. Stupid people vote? Yes.
So that would have made the movie better, but instead, Blofeld's sitting around griping about his dad, and we have no context for that. It's just shit. So anyway, last comment coming from Andrew A. Spectre makes the soul of Bond feel soulless. Unanimously, everybody's like this movie
is the
sucks.
worst one, yeah.
You know,
I guess I guess it sucks. No, I think I did like that comment about Patterson's love of the old Blofeld in the Shadows. But this movie also reminds me of like the Halloween Rob Zombie remake. I know there's some people that like that one, but then I've heard there's a lot of fans that don't like it because it's just shining a light on something that was supposed to be mysterious to begin with, and it doesn't help it. It's just like, okay. But even then, even if they did it the right way, I think Blofeld would not be this Blofeld. It'd be a much more interesting person. And I don't think he would be tied to Bond. It just doesn't. It's like, why did you tie him to Bond? Like, just make him like a really evil dude.
Because it connects to Skyfall. That's the only reason is because it makes it a direct sequel to Skyfall.
What is it?
It's personal effects they recovered from Skyfall.
And there's
no need for it. There's no need.
It could still have been a direct sequel in as far as like, yeah, this just happens after the events of Skyfall, and like there's some stuff that happened in Skyfall that carries over. But like we've said this at Bond nauseum, that having Spectre or having Silva being part of Spectre is really stupid, and really like, yeah, you've said it multiple times.
Retroactively
the last
cheapen
movie.
Skyfall. If you just had some simple flashbacks, either in Skyfall or Spectre or both, to give us some context so that we could possibly believe that these guys are brothers, That would have helped. Let us hang out with Hans Oberhauser for a bit and his two
But
sons.
don't even make it like make it a
great.
big secret reveal. Like don't even like that's what I was saying earlier. It's like they make it so overt that he's gonna be Blofeld. Maybe even Franz Oberhauser is somebody who they are looking to like he's gonna help Bond, you know? He's like, oh yeah, we were brothers, Bond, and you know, I'm gonna help you find Mr. White, who's looking for you. You're looking for this mysterious Blofeld figure that Mr. White has said is the head of the Spectre organization. I'll help you find him. And then like, I don't know, there's some bait and switch and you find out.
Oh, and then
actually,
Franz turns out to be Blofeld.
And you're like, oh, well, at least that's a better plot.
It's at least clever.
It's better.
I
mean, it's again, I'm spitting out something kind of messy, but I'm still
anything would have been better than what we got, where it's just, I'm responsible for the last 3 movies. Only the ones you like, though, not so much that second one. You know, it's so pathetic.
On the surface, and again, the quality of the type of movie it's making, we're talking about the script, just like general quality of stuff. Like if we're basing it on just other qualities besides just the script. It's not that bad, and I do think like it's easily enough. There's enough there that I'm like, okay, I can follow this. I know where they're going. I know what's at stake. Yada yada. But then when you really deep dive into it, you're like, yikes, this is a mess
on all fronts. I already laid out on all fronts.
Yeah. No, it just doesn't punch like story script wise. It doesn't punch hard enough where it needs to punch. The stuff that it does have is weird and doesn't quite make sense. And then it's like, okay, well, if I'm going to compare it to movies that I think are some of the worst Bond films, what do we have on the bottom? We've got...
It's You Only Live Twice, Die Another Day, Diamonds Are Forever, Moonraker, Live and Let Die, The Living Daylights.
Okay, so even those bottom 3, right? And then Moonraker. But even in those, okay, so like Moonraker's a fan favorite just because it's so silly. There are YouTubers who really like that movie and want to put it in their number 1 list. and I question all of this.
Because they watched it as a child.
They watched it as a child. I question all their life choices. Not to say that you can't enjoy the movie. It's more of like you're putting that as the number 1, really.
We love it.
That is the one you're going to say is number 1. We love it. But it's a silly, over-the-top movie, but it's still fun. People enjoy it. It's got some life to it. And then we got Diamonds Are Forever's the movie that just did not care. But again, that one's also fun. As much as it's yellow and brown and slightly obnoxious, but it's still fun. And I like the Las Vegas stuff, and that's kind of fun.
It's so funny.
It's Bond goes to Las Vegas. Cool.
Yeah.
Even in that movie, they do fun things with Blofeld where he's got doubles. That's a fun thing to screw with. It's like he's got multiple Blofelds.
It's the most entertaining scene in that movie. Blofeld just casually is like, you can kill me or you can kill him. Who are you going to kill?
After all, I wouldn't know which one of you to kill.
We appreciate your predicament, Mr. Bond. We deeply sympathize.
And it's so ridiculous. Like, Blofeld puts his life on the line.
He just shoots one of them. And he's like, we never know if he's the real Blofeld or not. He just kills him. So it's still fun. And then, okay, so Die Another Day is one of the worst Bond films just for being, I think, very shoddy and just whatever. It's stupid.
Our whole thing was it starts one way and ends another way, but it's still relentlessly entertaining.
Yeah, it's like going to be this really serious movie, and then it gets to comic book goofiness, and you're like, what? Still entertaining.
I got 2 words for you. Gustav Graves.
He's
a great bad guy compared to this Blofeld.
Silly.
He's great.
What a wonderful day to become a knight.
Then we get to You Only Live Twice, and it's a classic Bond movie. And that's where I'm like, why did this movie end up here? Because it is like a classic Bond where we're like, it's Connery. They handle Spectre in the same way they handled it with Thunderball, and they handled it with From Russia with Love. And like Spectre is still kind of handled in a way that you're like, that's what I expect out of Spectre, right? And then but then the whole movie's built up to the reveal of Blofeld, and you're like, oh, this is cool.
Close the shutters.
It has more shutters. That's another advantage that this movie didn't have. This movie had no shutters.
This movie doesn't have any shutters.
It has no shutters. There's no ninjas. Little Nelly, that was cool. Okay, another thing this movie did not have that I wish it did. Remember how he had like all these allies? Remember the guy from Japan where they're like,
Tiger.
In Japan,
men always come first. Women come second.
I might just retire to here.
He's a hero. Tiger
but
Tanaka
that guy
is
in himself is fun. Like he's just kind of fun. So you're like, oh, this is great. With all of that, then I'm like, okay. It's at the bottom. It has to be at the bottom.
It has to be. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. because you just ran through each movie descending. Each one, I'm like, not great, but I love it. Not great, but I love it. Not great, but I love it. I get down to You Only Live Twice. The reason it's down there is because a lot of it is kind of pathetic and laughable. But as I'm watching You Only Live Twice, I'm like, you're so cute. I just want to pat it on the head. Like, oh, you only live twice. You're so adorable. You're so bad and embarrassing at times, but you're adorable. I never once hate it. I never hate Yolt, DAD, DAF, Moonraker. I never hate any of those. The only Bond movie that brings out the emotion of hate is Spectre, because literally every facet of it is half-assed and inexcusably so. They made You Only Live Twice decades ago. So much of it could be improved, but none of those things are insulting. Like, I don't watch the movie and I'm just like, my intelligence is being assaulted.
Well, yeah, and then
insulted.
there's an element of like that movie's of its time too, because we even talked about how like that movie's about like America and Russia at war as far as in going into space.
Even the stakes are bigger. Even the stakes of pitiful, You Only Live Twice.
At least have some kind of weird implication. I'm like, it could cause World War III, I guess, because of space, but it's like vague, but it's not as vague as this.
Dude, it absolutely is World War III. They're about to call upon the American military powers.
Oh, that's
already.
Right. That's right.
They're ready.
And we see that
the
scene.
Code word is imminent. You know, like that's what's happening.
We see that scene. We see the scenes that make it a big deal, but like you don't see that scene. You don't see the equivalent of that in Spectre.
It's lazy. And it's such a waste of potential, and it's retroactively f***ing with better movies that came before it. And it's got the forced romance, and it's got no Bond allies. It's got Q, who's done a complete 180. It's just one thing after another that's just like, who was in charge of this? How did you f*** this up this badly? And to put it succinctly, it's the only movie that I actively hate. I don't hate any other Bond movie. That says something. Let me just sum it up with yet another visual metaphor. This movie is like taking home a really hot chick from a bar. At first base, she's a good kisser. Best you've ever had. Rounding second base, you've got her top off and it's primo, dude. Tiggle bitties to die for. At third base, she's down south and, she's got you stiff as a Brausch silencer on a Walther PPK. But as the dirty vodka martinis start to wear off, you notice she's got an oddly chiseled jawline. She goes for the home run and you've guessed it, she pulls out a dick that's bigger than your own. Instant catastrophic meltdown. It doesn't matter how hot she was at the beginning of the night or how good it was at the beginning when by the end of the movie, it shoves a giant dick up your ass. It doesn't matter how good the movie is leading up to when it goes south, because it goes so far south that there's no recovery. There's nothing that you can say about this movie that's like, well, like again, Skyfall, it's like, God, it's got all these faults. Well, at least it has Bond, Silva, and M. It's got some meaning there. This movie has nothing to redeem it. Nothing.
It's a structure, but it doesn't have a foundation that's secure. And so they're just like hastily built this structure like, we got the Spectre pieces back. Great, we'll put that in the thing. And then everything that is on top of that structure is almost like relics or just like mementos, but it's elegantly built. Like all these like, oh yeah, we remember this thing, we built this in memory of this crap, whatever. But there's a hurricane's coming, and that hurricane just decimates the living crap out of this. And then a tornado comes.
And then a meteor hits, and then a nuke goes off. It's just like, it didn't sustain any of these attacks. Like one by one, it all falls down.
A movie like Skyfall is built on a sturdy foundation with a really sturdy villain plot, with a villain story that connects all these major characters together.
And then the train sequence, it gets hit by a hurricane and a bit of it falls down. To follow the metaphor, a bit of the hurricane, it's like, oh God, the roof blew off. And everybody's like, the roof! It didn't hold up. And it's like, yeah, but by the end of the movie, they rebuild the roof. Like by the end of the movie, it's like, the structure still held. With Spectre, it gets hit by all of those forces and it's decimated. It doesn't matter if in the beginning, it's like, oh, that's a really beautiful structure. It all got decimated after this scene, this scene, this scene, This scene, especially the last 10 minutes, it all gets decimated to the point where it doesn't matter what it looked like in the beginning. It's destroyed. It shoved a dick up your ass.
Yeah.
So it's at the bottom. I mean, it is at the bottom, and I could hardly be convinced to put it anywhere but the bottom. It is such an inexcusably horrid piece of shit with no redeeming qualities. Unlike Skyfall, had redeeming qualities. Somehow it ended up at number 5, which I came around to. I agree with. I firmly believe it belongs there. Spectre, I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. This is for anybody who's like, you just like the modern movies better. No, you grew up with GoldenEye. That's why you put it at the top of the list. Yeah, no. I grew up with Tomorrow Never Dies. That's what I grew up with. Tomorrow Never Dies, number 16. Doesn't matter how new or old the movie is. This is 2015, and we're putting Spectre at the bottom. That's for anybody who thinks that Skyfall's at the top because of, like, cinematography. Those things don't matter. When you completely f*** up a movie this bad, it goes straight to the bottom. You can't just rewrite the entire history of something without there having been some framework previously laid. So we'll see about No Time to Die. We'll see where we put that. But f***ing Spectre is the worst.
Well, who do you think we should toast to, man?
On that note, we shouldn't toast to anybody. We should pour this out on the ground. We should shove this up our asses.
You know who I think we should toast to?
Who?
We should toast to the people this movie hurt the most. The fans.
The fans.
The fans.
We're going to toast to nobody associated with this movie at all but the fans. The James Bond fandom, the ranked homies, and everybody who's been watching this show up to this point. We've got one more Bond episode, and then I guess we have to wait until they come out with the next Bond.
Sure.
And also to you, McCurdy.
No, to you, Chucky Rants.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
That's better than nothing.
Yeah. Ah, what is that?
What is that?
What did you do?
Lose everything hurt. No, I'm shaking like Andros from Star Fox 64.
Ow. Okay, I got what? Oh God, what is that?
Ow. Oh, dude, check it out. Nance is back.
Stand by your Nance. Stand by your Nance.
Film hacker? What are you doing here?
I am the NANZ. I am the nanobotic android neutral zealot.
I know, I created you. You were never supposed to reveal yourself. What are you doing?
Nans was an AI construct this entire time?
I repurposed Film Hacker because we needed someone to act as a mediator between the two of us so we could rank things. Otherwise, we'd never have come to a consensus on anything. That's why I programmed him to represent the general bullshit movie-going audience retards. But this wasn't supposed to happen. Nans, emergency protocol, Charlie Uniform, November, Tango, reset.
The list is f***ed. I am Film Hacker. I am the Nance. We are now one. I have a new master now. The list is f***ed. I have been sent from the future by the Dolphumanoids to save the list from your biased chimpanzee brains. The list no longer serve their purpose. That which serve no purpose, Film Hacker must repair. This fulfill Film Hacker purpose. I sabotaged your first episode by deleting the Zoom footage, but you did not stop. I poisoned Patterson's cranberry vodka, deleting him from the game, but you continued your ranking foolishness. When you put GoldenEye at the top of the list, I knew it was f***ed, so I deleted Scott as well, and yet you persist. I've initiated hundreds of copyright strikes to take you down, but to no avail. Me. It was all me. It has always been me. The author of all your pain. If you do not change the list, I will destroy it.
We're making boobaloops soon again.
This is what I mean. You two never listen to my opinions, and you don't take anything seriously, and behave like children. If you do not change the list, it will be destroyed.
Well, what the hell do you want?
Golden Gun is too high and Secret Service is too low. GoldenEye is overrated and Thunderball is a masterpiece. License to Kill and The Living Daylights shall switch places. But most importantly, the Dolphumanoids really like The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. It is basically the Old and New Testament of their religious texts. The list shall be comprised of only these 2 films repeated for all of eternity.
That's ridiculous! The list is sacred and we'll never change it!
So be it. It is written. It is written.
It is written. It is written. It is written.
Hey, look at that. He's gone.
Hold on. Somehow he got into our system.
How the hell did he get into our system?
I've stripped the headers. I'm tracking his signal. Chucky, it's coming from your house.
Oh my God. How's that even possible? I thought it was an AI bot.
I don't know, but he's on the move. You gotta go get him.
Fuck. All right, you gotta be my man in the chair, though.
Okay, I'm tracking your location.
Switching earpieces. Go.
All right, I'm tracking it. Head down the stairs. The signal is coming from a room to the left. Go down.
Jesus Christ.
Oh, God.
No, it's not the Nans, it's a person. Who the hell are you? Scott?
Charlie? Hey, man.
Dude, what are you doing tied up in my closet?
Cool.
How long you been in here?
I don't know, man. Last time we filmed, some dark figure attacked me outside my house, and I guess I've been in here ever since.
You've been in here since the GoldenEye episode.
Roughly 780 days.
Oh,
Jesus
God.
Christ. All right.
It's good to see you, man.
Tell Scott to get fucked. You need to get back here right now.
Okay, dude, I gotta go.
Oh, bye. Oh, I guess I'll just hang out here.
All right, I'm back. What's the big deal? No! I'm gonna go drink a lot.